Chapter 238. Deep into the night, the sky above King's Descent City was suddenly covered by dark clouds, appearing both oppressive and gloomy. In addition, bad news about the war was constantly spreading through the streets and alleys, causing everyone to feel a sense of suffocation. As the true ruler of the city, Cersei Lannis was standing on the balcony of her bedroom, thinking about what she should do next to protect her power and status. Despite her many fatal flaws, she was no fool. She knew that the war in the South would decide who would rule Westeros for the next few centuries. She didn't dare to let her guard down. However, just as she was considering whether she should risk everything and engage in a final battle with the enemy once the old town was lost, or if she should choose to endure and retreat and kneel down to pledge her loyalty to the enemy like her father did, a maid walked up to her quickly and reported, "Your Majesty, bad news. The guards in the castle are suffering from diarrhea on a large scale. Sir Adam Marbrand believes that this matter is very alarming." Diarrhea? Have they found the cause? Cersei frowned subconsciously. The maesters are inspecting the kitchen. They believe that there is a problem with the dinner. The maid replied carefully. "Tell them to hurry up. Also, tell Sir Adam Marbrand to immediately send a group of guards to the gates. Double the patrols tonight." Cersei hesitated for a few seconds before giving the order. Although diarrhea was not a rare occurrence due to poor eating habits and extremely poor hygiene conditions, the occurrence of large-scale diarrhea during this sensitive period still made her worried. "Understood. I will have Ser Marbrand prepare it." The maid bowed slightly and disappeared into the dark corridor. But before she could reach the end of the spiral staircase, a hand suddenly reached out from the darkness and covered her mouth. Then, a sharp dagger pierced through her jaw and went straight through her brain. The young girl's eyes widened, her face blank. Even in death, she didn't know who had killed her or why they had done this. When the muscles of the corpse began to relax, a young girl around 12 years old dressed as a servant slowly left the shadows. She looked around to make sure that no one had seen her before she let out a sigh of relief. She didn't deal with the corpse. Instead, she pulled out a torch and waved it 3 times in front of the window. At the same time, the boy hiding at the exit of the secret passage who was in charge of leading the way saw this scene and quickly turned to Oberyn. "My lord, he can make his move now. Our men will cooperate with you and get rid of a few patrolling guards in important positions. Don't waste any time. Go straight to the Meg Tower and capture the king and his mother. Then, attack the White Sword Tower and kill the Kingsguard. You will be able to completely control the Red Castle. Don't worry. I don't need you to teach me. I know what to do." As he spoke, Red Viper lifted his spear and was the first to rush out of the secret passage. His speed was so fast that before the soldiers behind him could react, he had already arrived behind the 2 patrolling guards and pierced their throats. "Ha ha! That was right. Awesome. This was the feeling. Power. Revenge. Don't worry, my dear sister. The bastard who killed you will soon be punished." Oberyn muttered to himself in a neurotic manner as he took the lead in launching an assault on the golden robes that weren't that strong to begin with. Just like his nickname, most of the people who were attacked didn't even know what was going on before they were killed by the spear that was like a poisonous tongue. In the blink of an eye, a few of the highest points in the castle had been lost. The elite warriors from Dorne had silently sealed off the only entrance and exit, at the same time blocking the passageways to a few of the main buildings. At this point, the sneak attack could be considered a success. Even if the enemy immediately discovered and counterattacked, it was only a matter of time before they completely fell. As the faint smell of blood began to fill the air, Oberyn, covered in blood, finally killed his way into the Meg Tower. This huge square fortress was located in the middle of the Red Castle. It had walls that were 3.5 meters thick and a moat that was covered in iron spikes. Whether it was during the Targaryen dynasty's rule or now, it had always been the royal palace. Unfortunately, the tall and sturdy city walls didn't have any effect at all. After losing around 30 men, the Dornishmen had successfully taken over the walls and shot at the stubborn enemy from above. For a moment, the whooshing sounds of arrows could be heard. In the blink of an eye, at least 100 city guards were screaming and falling to the ground. Due to the protection of their armor, most of them did not die on the spot. However, they were stabbed to death by the pikemen that followed closely behind. No mercy, no mercy, and no persuasion to surrender. In less than 15 minutes, blood and corpses covered the entrance of the Meg Tower. Less than 20 people had successfully retreated inside. There was no doubt that unless one was deaf, it was impossible not to hear such a desperate battle. The King's Guard living in the White Blade Tower sensed that the castle was under attack and immediately gathered a small group of guards, wanting to run over to rescue them. However, they were stopped by the Dornishmen halfway. Not only were they unable to break through the blockade, they suffered heavy losses. Many of the King's Guard had 7 or 8 arrows stuck to their bodies. Of course, that wasn't the only problem. Anyone with common sense would know that the Dornies loved to dip their weapons in poison. Perhaps a flesh wound wouldn't be a problem for a knight with a strong physique, but once poisoned, it would be a different story. Unfortunately, Adam Marbrand, who was the captain of the city's garrison, could not feel the pain from his wound. This was undoubtedly a sign of poisoning. Damn it! He cursed fiercely and quickly turned his head to speak to the attendant behind him. Go. Get some oil and firewood and light a fire on the top floor of the White Blade Tower. Remember, the fire must be big enough. I want the entire King's Landing city to see it. Yes, sir. The attendant's eyes lit up, as if he understood his master's plan. He quickly called for his 2 companions and ran back. Whether it was Adam Marbrand or the attendant who had just left, none of them realized that within their group there was a middle-aged man hiding in the shadows and observing everything. One of his hands was gripping his sword tightly, as if he had just made an important decision. He quietly returned to the White Blade Tower. Just as the 3 attendants had gathered the materials to set the fire, the middle-aged man suddenly charged out and stabbed the person holding the torch to death with his sword. He then raised his leg and kicked the other unlucky fellow out of the window. With the height of the tower and the weight of the armor, even if he was lucky enough to survive, he would not be able to stand up for a while. Chapter 239. As the crucial fire hadn't been set, the city guard stationed at the outer walls had no idea what was going on inside the Red Keep. Thus, they didn't send any reinforcements. In the end, Adam Marbrand was finally poisoned by the intense battle and fell into a state of unconsciousness. With him unconscious, the remaining ordinary soldiers, who were already in low morale, immediately fled in all directions. They could no longer organize a decent counterattack, and it did not take long for them to be wiped out by the Dornish warriors who had the advantage in numbers. Even though there were many skilled fighters in the King's Guard, such as Meryn Tran, Loras Tyrell, Balon Sven, and so on, they were still outnumbered. They were unable to defeat an enemy that was dozens of times their size. They were wiped out after a short resistance. Furthermore, the most skilled fighter in the King's Guard, Magic Mountain Gregor Cregan, was in charge of guarding the entrance to the royal palace. He wasn't even in the White Blade Tower. He was busy defending against Oberyn's crazy attacks, and in less than 3 minutes of fighting, his body was already riddled with 4 or 5 holes. The strength and muscles that he was usually proud of were completely useless at this moment. He could only watch helplessly as the spear pierced through his defenses again and again, ruthlessly stabbing into his flesh. His cumbersome body and slow reactions made him realize for the first time that the strength he was so proud of was so weak in the face of speed. Ah! The intense pain made him go crazy. He gave up on defending and wanted to kill the enemy directly. Unfortunately, Oberyn, who was known as the Red Viper, wasn't fooled. He used his nimble footwork to easily avoid the cold glint of the sharp blade. He laughed happily. Yes, that's it. This is the revenge I want. The sweetest revenge. Do you remember? You raped her, killed her. She even killed her child. Today, I'll let you taste the most painful death. The soldiers from Dorne obviously knew that their prince wanted to deal with the enemy himself. Not only did they not help, they formed a circle and forbade anyone from interfering. As for his lover, Eulalia Shad, the corners of her mouth curled up. She had a cruel smile on her face, as if she was anticipating something. Soon, accompanied by the sounds of fighting, The blood flowing out of Gregor Cregan's wound was no longer dark red, but black like ink. It emitted a pungent stench, and his angry roars gradually turned into painful howls. If Zhang Cheng were present, he would definitely be able to tell that the black blood that was spilled out contained extremely evil death energy. If there were no accidents, the wound would rot and maggots would grow in about 2 or 3 days. Then, the maggots would spread to every corner of the body until the body was completely rotten. After being poisoned, rather than enduring inhumane torture and struggling at death's door, it would be better to just die and receive less punishment. Unfortunately, Gregor Clegane didn't realize the situation he was in and continued to wield his weapon wildly. He was holding a heavy broadsword in his left hand and a double-edged axe in his right arm. He was trying to turn the pain that constantly stimulated his nerves into the power of anger to chop this annoying enemy in front of him into minced meat. Ever since his face was disfigured and his right thumb was cut off during the martial arts tournament, he ordered someone to forge an axe and fix it to his armguard. Now, this axe had already drunk the blood of many innocent people, and there were even large black clots of coagulated blood left in some places. Oomph. What a complete idiot. Auburn's eyes flashed with a cold light. He quickly turned around to the side of his opponent and stabbed at one of his calves. Puff! Instantly, blood splattered everywhere. One had to know that the shin armor only protected the front and did not have any protection against attacks from the back. There was no accident. Magic Mountain screamed and fell to the ground. The armor and weapon on his body were too heavy. It was so heavy that once one of his legs was injured and unable to maintain his balance, it would be impossible for him to stand up again. Enjoying the sight of his enemy lying on the ground glaring at him fiercely, the Red Viper shook off the blood on the tip of his spear and stepped on his enemy's head. Using the tone of a victor, he declared, "Gregor Cregan, I now declare that you have committed the crime of rape. Murder. Death sentence. But I won't let you die so easily. You will rot in extreme pain and despair bit by bit. Men, chop off his limbs and throw him into the dungeon. Remember, send him food on time. If he doesn't eat, force it down his throat. I want to listen to his cries every day. Respect. Prince." 2 guards who had been waiting for a long time stepped forward. They raised the sharp swords in their hands and chopped off Magic Mountain's limbs in an extremely bloody manner. Then, they burned the wounds with torches to stop the bleeding. After doing all this, they dragged the unconscious captive in the direction of the Red Keep's dungeon and disappeared at the end of the corridor in a short while. After the 2 left, Auburn turned around and glanced at Cersei Lannister, who was wearing a translucent silk nightgown, as well as her son Tommen and daughter-in-law Marjorie in the corner. He said with a faint smile, "Next. What should I do with you?" "My dear, I think it's too wasteful to kill them directly. You can first taste the eldest daughter of the Lannister family. After all, she was a famous beauty in the 7 Kingdoms when she was young. Then you can enjoy our handsome little king and his queen. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is the style of the Dornishmen, isn't it?" Eulalia, Shad suggested as she licked her lips. No. We are not Lannisters. We can't do such a thing. Perhaps I am very lecherous, but I will never force others." Auburn shook his head without thinking. Eulalia shrugged her shoulders indifferently. "All right, then what do you plan to do with them?" "Very simple. I have an agreement with Mason. We will deal with them according to the agreement." As soon as he finished speaking, Oberon suddenly raised the spear in his hand without warning, and with 3 puffs, he executed the most important captives on the spot. In the last moment of their lives, both the ambitious Cersei and the pampered Marjorie had a look of disbelief in their eyes. Even in death, they could not believe that the Red Viper would choose to kill them instead of keeping them as political bargaining chips. "Wow, you killed Myrcella's mother and brother. I think Tristan will hate you to death." Eulalia shouted exaggeratedly. "Ha ha, then let him hate me. Now is the time to invite Her Majesty in to preside over the situation. Although we have control of the Red Keep, don't forget that there are still many Lannister and Tyrell survivors outside." Auburn reminded meaningfully. Chapter 240. Meteorologist Edward Lorenz once explained, "A butterfly in the tropical rainforest of the Amazon River region in South America, occasionally flapping its wings a few times, can cause a tornado in Texas in the United States 2 weeks later." Although this sentence was originally used to refer to a dynamic system, where a small change in initial conditions could lead to a huge long-term chain reaction of the whole system, it was later extended to include social, economic, psychological, mathematical, and other aspects. It was used to describe examples of small changes causing serious consequences. Zhang Cheng did not know if he was a butterfly that broke into the world of ice and fire, but the result of his flapping wings had already formed a terrible, perfect storm, and the old town was the center of the storm, the eye of the storm. Looking at the huge fleet on the horizon, he did not show any fear. Instead, he raised the corner of his mouth and muttered in a rather excited tone, "It's here. It's finally here. The experiment can finally begin. Let me show you the true power of magic before I leave. Master, according to your request, everything is ready." Maroya appeared in the room at some point, her eyes shining with fanaticism. As the only assistant who could help in the field of magic, she naturally participated and understood what it meant if these experiments were successful. "Very good." Zhang Cheng nodded with satisfaction and then ordered, "Go, give our guest the first greeting gift." "Ha! As you wish, my dear master." Maroya licked her lips cruelly and turned to the control center of the towering tower. In just a few minutes, the originally calm sea suddenly rose up and down with waves. Before either side could react to what was happening, a huge noise echoed over the city. Boom, boom, boom. Under the influence of an unknown force, a huge wave of up to 100 meters high rose into the sky and forcibly lifted the huge fleet into the air. It was like a big hand that threw all the ships toward the port area. The wooden ships that relied on sails and oars naturally could not withstand the most violent side of the sea. They could only rush toward the port area with the waves. Some unlucky ones accidentally fell from the deck into the turbulent sea and were swallowed in the blink of an eye, never to surface again. Seven gods. This is... Kevin Lannister couldn't help but exclaim when he saw the spectacular scene before him. Although he had heard from his elder brother, Tywin, that this young man called Mason possessed an incredible and mysterious power, it was one thing to hear about it, and another to see it with his own eyes. In particular, creating a 100-meter tsunami out of thin air was not a power that a human should possess. It could be foreseen that when more than 1,000 ships crashed into the ground, it would inevitably cause a huge number of casualties and chaos. Although it would not be to the extent of total annihilation, more than half of them would definitely be killed or injured. At this moment, Kevin finally believed that the rumors were true. That young man with a mysterious aura could really decide the outcome of a war by himself. Ordinary soldiers simply had no power to resist in the face of such an earth-shattering natural disaster. James, the Kingslayer, gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and said with a serious expression, "Uncle, I think we have to think about how to deal with Mason. I don't want to meet him as an enemy on the battlefield one day. That would definitely be a nightmare." "Agreed. It seems like we have to put in more effort in the upcoming battle to make up for the unpleasantness from the last time we met." Kevin quickly made a judgment. As Tywin's most capable assistant and trusted aide, he knew when to appear strong and when to give in. Moreover, the Lannister family was currently in a special period. Tywin, who had a strong deterrent force, had just passed away, and Cersei was constantly fighting with her former ally, the Tyrell family, for power. He definitely couldn't make another enemy that he couldn't defeat. Of course, he didn't know that King's Landing had already fallen. Whether it was the Tyrell family or the Lannister family, they had all been uprooted. The three-headed dragon flag of the Targaryen family once again fluttered above the Red Keep. Just like that, the ships that Eric had plundered from the eastern continent crashed into the old town's docks amidst countless exclamations of shock. For a moment, the sounds of wooden planks shattering and the cries of injured soldiers rang out incessantly. The defenders who had been hiding in the alleys and waiting for a long time swarmed forward, taking advantage of the enemy's chaos to launch a ferocious attack. Tens of thousands of people clashed in this narrow space, crimson blood spraying everywhere. However, those with keen eyes knew that these soldiers were merely cannon fodder in today's battle. The true determinants of the battle were the dragons soaring in the sky. Zhang Cheng sat on Kulo Kelba's back and stared at his old acquaintance who was also riding on Drojing's back. After a long while, he smiled and greeted, "Good day, my dear Eric. I didn't think that you would actually survive. It's all thanks to you, my lord. I now have the power and authority that I've always dreamed of. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Master still needs your help to escape." Eric returned the bow unhurriedly, his light purple eyes revealing a strong hatred. Power? Ha ha! Don't make me laugh. You call this power? At best, it's just charity from strong. True power is never bestowed by others. It is something that belongs to you through your own learning, comprehension, and creation. Once you have it, no one can take it away from you. But what about you? You're being ordered around like a dog. Zhang Cheng deliberately sneered and mocked. Oomph. No need to show off your eloquence. You won't be able to laugh soon. Even if I can't kill you, I can destroy everything you have. For example, that beautiful young wife of yours and Daenerys under your protection. After I'm done with you, I'll have a good taste of them. With that, Eric raised his arm and waved it forcefully. The other young dragons that weren't very large immediately swooped down towards the crowd below, spewing out bright and scorching flames. The defenders who were suddenly attacked immediately began to retreat in panic. They lost all their original advantage and fell into an extremely disadvantageous position. You think a few dragons can defeat me? Too naive. Seeing the miserable state of his subordinates, Zhang Cheng didn't panic in the slightest. He didn't even move, as if he was waiting for something. The next second, a huge horn emitting a blinding red light appeared at the top of the sky piercer. Chapter 241. As the low and melodious voice spread in all directions, the dragon whelps that were madly killing the defenders all showed a pained expression. They roared madly as they used their scorching flames to attack every living thing or building around them, regardless of friend or foe. In just a few minutes, the entire port area was engulfed in a sea of fire. Dragon binder? No, this is not a dragon binder. Damn it, what did you do to it? Eric asked with fear as he forcefully suppressed his mount that was constantly struggling. He could feel that the dragons that were originally under his control were now filled with crazy and violent emotions. Not to mention controlling all of them. Even controlling one of them was very difficult. Obviously, this was not the effect of a dragon binder, but another kind of extremely evil magic. After all, as a bystander, Eric had seen Zhang Cheng take the dragon's horn from Yulon Greyjoy with his own eyes. Naturally, he would have prepared countermeasures. But what he did not expect was that not only did Link not choose to use this powerful magic item to control the dragons, but he also made some kind of modification. All the dragons that heard the horn began to go crazy without exception. Ha ha! How is it? Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Don't worry, my friend. There are more interesting things to come. I promise that before the outcome of today's battle is decided, no one will leave the old town alive. After saying that, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Due to the distance from Taiyuan, the crisp sound did not spread too far before completely dissipating. However, Maroya, who had noticed his gesture, did not hesitate to activate the second function of the towering tower, mass enchantment. The translucent crystal at the top of the tower suddenly released a bright light. After being illuminated by the light, the defenders, who were still retreating in defeat, immediately seemed to change into another person. They were completely unafraid of death. Even if they were facing the dragon's breath, they still continued to charge forward. At the same time, many residents in the city were also affected. They all carried their weapons and joined the battle. For a moment, blood splattered everywhere. In just a short while, corpses were piled up everywhere. The degree of brutality was simply beyond the limits of what humans could bear. There was even a baby dragon that was slightly smaller in size that was directly pierced through by dozens of spears. It screamed and fell into a pool of blood. Blood that looked like magma sprayed out from the inside of its body. In the end, its entire body was set ablaze with flames that soared into the sky, engulfing all the unlucky creatures within a radius of dozens of meters. Looking at the chaotic scene below, Eric took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and said, "Lunatics! What a lunatic! Do you want to destroy this place and bury hundreds of thousands of people with you? Buried with him? No, no, no." Zhang Cheng chuckled and shook his head. "You don't understand my actions at all, do you? To tell you the truth, I have already turned the old town into a testing ground. Everyone, including you, is a test subject. You can't possibly be so naive as to think that you and I will have an evenly matched battle, right?" Arrogant. Sensing the mockery and disdain in Leyland's tone, Eric could no longer contain the anger in his heart. He quickly transformed into his half-dragon form and raised the long spear in his hand, charging towards Leyland. An idiot that is easily angered by words. I like this kind of enemy. A hint of playfulness flashed in Zhang Cheng's eyes. He immediately ordered Kulo Kelba to climb higher and avoid a direct collision with Eric. After all, he was a wizard. There was no other profession more suited to riding on the back of a dragon than a wizard. He was not in a hurry to chant a powerful spell. Instead, he took out a small potion bottle from his waist pouch and threw it down lightly. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the falling bottle collided with Eric's charge. The moment it shattered, a violent explosion occurred. Its power was no less than a fireball spell. The impact of the explosion almost caused Eric to fall off the dragon's back. Perhaps the tough scales on his body could resist the burning of flames or even the slashing and piercing of swords, but they could not prevent the powerful force from affecting his brain. He could only shake his head to force himself to regain consciousness. However, how could the experienced Zhang Cheng possibly give his opponent a chance to catch his breath? He took out more bottles of various colors and tossed them all at once. Instantly, the unlucky Eric was instantly drowned in all sorts of energy explosions. Fire, acid, lightning, frost. There were even vines that could grow rapidly, created by studying the magic system of the child of the forest. In less than a minute, these seemingly insignificant plants had spread around the dragon's wings, greatly limiting the frequency at which Zhuogang could flap his wings. Even though he wanted to get rid of this annoying thing many times, he failed to do so. He could only struggle to descend, finally crashing into a house with a thud. Looking at the wooden house that had been crushed by the dragon's body, Zhang Cheng calmly took out the notebook he carried with him. He took notes as he muttered to himself, "Excluding the first experimental potion that I can't determine due to my immunity to fire, the rest of the effects are not bad. Although they can't play a decisive role, they can be used as a means of restraint. Now, it's time to enter the second stage." Just as he finished speaking, a dazzling ball of fire suddenly shot out from the ruins of the house. "Ah, bastard! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" The enraged Eric raised his spear and stabbed it into Zhuogang's back. Asterisk poo. Asterisk hot dragon blood spurted out more than 2 meters into the air. Bathed in the dragon's blood, the scales on his body emitted an indescribable color. Zhuogang sprawled on the ground, letting out miserable cries. However, he didn't make any moves to resist until he breathed his last. When he died, Eric's body started to swell inexplicably, and a pair of exaggerated dragon wings grew on his back. Sacrifice? Blood magic? Zhang Cheng's eyes shone with excitement. Although he'd already obtained the records of this magic from the stone tablet, this was the first time he'd seen it. There was no doubt that through cruel deprivation, the spellcaster could obtain all the abilities of the dragon when it was alive, including flight, spitting, and strength and physique that far exceeded that of humans. In addition to Eric's own abilities in his half-dragon form, he was a perfect killing machine. As a person who pursued power, Zhang Cheng couldn't wait to capture him and bring him to the basement for dissection, research, and testing. Chapter 242. "Oh, why did you stop?" Zhang Cheng asked with a half-smile. In the face of such an aggressive opponent, he didn't even move a finger. Only his mount seemed to be a little nervous. Even though Koro Kelba had been blessed with magic protection and was not affected by the horn of the dragon binder, the blood of Clonada that flowed in the half-dragon's body still made him feel a strong sense of fear. After all, most of the dragons in the world of the Song of Ice and Fire were congenitally deficient because they could not absorb enough energy. Naturally, they would not be able to compete with the mother of all dragons that had lived for who knows how many years. In fact, dragons were a type of magical creature that was extremely sensitive to power. Thus, when they felt that the enemy was several times stronger than them, they would choose to flee or submit. The so-called pride of dragons was always relative. No dragon would be stupid enough to risk their lives for an opponent that they could not defeat. Fortunately, the well water that was filled with arcane energy made up for some of Kolo Kelba's deficiencies and changed its constitution. Even though Zhang Cheng was not too sure what this change meant, at least it would not be controlled by the power of the bloodline. Eric stared with his beast-like yellow eyes, trying to figure out whether his opponent was fearless or just putting on a show. After a full minute, he threw the spear in his hand. With his terrifying muscle strength, the spear and air magic exploded with a piercing sound, and in the blink of an eye, it flew more than 10 meters away. At such a fast speed, not to mention chanting an incantation to release a spell, even dodging was an impossible task. However, Zhang Cheng did not cast a spell, nor did he have any intention of dodging. He only smiled and raised a finger. In an instant, thick ice covered him from top to bottom, leaving no gap at all. The next second, the spear hit the ice with a loud bang. Not only did it not cause any damage, it even broke and shattered on the spot. Without a doubt, this was no ordinary ice. It was one of the trump cards of the mages in the world of Azeroth, Ice Barrier. Not to mention an ordinary steel spear, even the powerful demons of the Burning Legion who used dark powers would not be able to break it easily. Although this skill could not block almost all forms of damage for a short period of time like in the game, it could still be destroyed if the damage was strong enough. But at the same time, it wasn't like in the game where it could only last for a few seconds. Unless the caster took the initiative to cancel it, it could last for a few minutes until the energy could no longer maintain the solid ice layer. Staring at the ice that was as smooth as a mirror, Eric's pupils rapidly contracted and enlarged. Finally, he said sarcastically with a dark face, "This is your trump card? An extremely hard tortoise shell? Are you planning to hide in there forever? Why not? Don't tell me you haven't noticed that an interesting experiment has begun. Feel the boiling death energy of this city. I don't even need to fight you head-on. It won't be long before you become like them, a mindless beast that only knows how to kill. When that time comes." At this point, Zhang Cheng suddenly paused. His eyes once again revealed a terrifying fanaticism. "When that time comes, I will come back to finish the last part of your body. When that time comes, you will understand how laughable you are in the face of true knowledge and power, just like a clown in the palace. What do you want to do?" Eric looked down at the scene of a purgatory of blood flowing into a river at the docks and shouted. Even with his almost sluggish senses, he could sense that the battlefield was filled with a strange atmosphere that made one tremble in fear. Especially as more and more people died, the whole city seemed to be shrouded in a layer of gray shadow. Even the originally clear sky became gloomy and the sun was completely covered by dark clouds. He did not understand what this strange change was and why he felt a strong sense of unease and vigilance. You want to know? Then try your best to survive this experiment. Only those who survive to the end will see the end. Oh, right, a reminder, don't think that you are invincible among these ordinary people. In order to make this experiment more interesting, I have added some fun gadgets. Please try them out. I hope you have fun. After saying that, Zhang Cheng did not wait for Eric's reaction. He directly crushed the teleportation rune in his hand and disappeared into thin air with Kolo Kelba in the blink of an eye. Eric was just about to stop the teleportation when he was suddenly pulled down to the ground by an invisible force. Before he could react, a gigantic creature pieced together from corpses pounced on him. It opened its bloody mouth and wanted to swallow him alive. Damn it! What kind of monster is this? He cursed in horror as he tore apart the corpses that reeked of blood and escaped. Of course, this was not what scared him the most. What scared him the most was that the surrounding soldiers from both sides completely ignored the monster in front of them. They were still immersed in their frenzied slaughter and could not extricate themselves. As the death toll continued to rise, the number of similar terrifying creatures was also rapidly increasing. Every 100 meters or so, one or two corpses of different sizes could be seen. Some of them had already devoured countless corpses. They were almost as big as the ships in the port. Their bodies exuded a strong aura of death. Some of the corpses had even completely fused together to form heads, torsos, and limbs. Eric simply did not know how to describe what was happening in front of him. If there was a place like purgatory in the world, then the old town at this moment was undoubtedly the most suitable. No reason, no thinking, nor was there any conquest as imagined. There was only frenzied slaughter and death. In order to survive, he had to do his best to fight with these endless, unknown monsters. If he was not careful, he would be swallowed. He now understood what the so-called experimental site meant. At the same time, Zhang Cheng, who had returned to the towering tower, was watching everything that was happening outside. Without turning his head, he ordered, "Go and release the little guy in the basement. It will definitely like the gluttonous feast I prepared for it." "As you wish, master." Maroya had a cruel smile on her face. After bowing with one hand on her chest, she turned and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Chapter 243. Even though it had yet to evolve the ability to think independently, this newborn death dragon was like a wild beast, possessing astonishing intuition and insight. It cleverly avoided Eric, who was the greatest threat to it, and specifically targeted the most heavily injured young dragons. Moreover, it specifically targeted their vital parts, not giving them any chance to retaliate. In a short span of 10 to 20 minutes, it had successfully hunted down 3 dragons that were much larger than itself, and successfully devoured their souls. Through the vague influence transmitted by the flowing water curtain in the center of the towering tower, Zhang Cheng discovered that this little fellow seemed to be growing smarter and stronger. In particular, the cold light flickering in its eyes revealed a trace of cruelty and cunning. There was no doubt that it enjoyed the process of killing and devouring. It also enjoyed the dense aura of death that enveloped the entire old town, as well as the pain and despair that remained in the large number of souls. As its creator, Zhang Cheng could vaguely feel that the Calamity Stone in his hand, which was connected to the Death Dragon's spiritual world, was constantly conveying its excitement and joy to him. Just as he was about to let this dangerous little fellow test Eric, Maroya suddenly barged in and shouted in a panic, "Master! Not good, master. Someone is stealing the energy stored at the bottom of the tower. According to the current rate of loss, we won't be able to maintain a large-scale group charm in an hour at most." What's going on? Didn't I tell you to drive everyone out of the tower? Zhang Cheng turned around and asked with a frown. In fact, in order to ensure that the plan would not be disturbed by external factors, he had already driven all the servants and guards out a few days ago, leaving only Maroya to help. He had even completely sealed the entrance. Under such circumstances, other than passing through the top of the tower guarded by Kolo Kelba, there was no other way to enter. He really could not think of anyone who could silently sneak into the bottom of the tower and steal the energy stored for thousands of years without alarming the dragons. "Sorry, master, I don't know. That fellow sealed the only entrance, and with my ability, I am unable to break it." Maroya lowered her head, her voice trembling as she explained. "Interesting. Let's see who has the guts to steal something that belongs to me." Zhang Cheng leaned on his flint staff and walked down the spiral staircase to the lowest level of the tower. About 6 or 7 minutes later, he saw the so-called obstacle in the dark passage. It was a mass of indescribable black shadow, like a mass of ink spilled on a huge canvas in the air. Anyone who approached it would instantly lose their perception of space and time, and in the next second, they would find themselves retreating back to where they came from. Shadow magic? No, that's not right. This isn't just shadow magic. There's something else mixed in, but this isn't a problem for me. After saying that, Zhang Cheng took out a small bottle of dragon blood and began to cast a spell. The dragon's blood in the bottle boiled rapidly in the midst of the low and choppy incantation. It turned into something like a red mist and surged into the shadows. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling red light burst out from within the shadow. Then, as if it was burning, it emitted light and heat in all directions. When the light and heat dissipated, the shadow in the middle of the passage had disappeared, leaving only a strange, pungent smell. Master, this is... Maroya stared at the unknown substance remaining in the air that was constantly disintegrating and dissipating. Her eyes revealed an unconcealable panic. Don't talk, follow me. Zhang Cheng ignored the servant's nervous reaction and continued to walk forward. As he got closer and closer to the place where the energy was stored, he could feel that this thief was definitely a spellcaster on par with himself. Because there wasn't even a little bit of overflow after stealing such a huge amount of energy, it was enough to show that the other party's magic control was very high. And people with high magic control were naturally not weak. With a strong sense of anticipation, the two of them finally saw a familiar yet unfamiliar figure around the corner. Deli, how could it be you? Maroya's eyes widened as she cried out. She couldn't be blamed for losing her composure, but the butler's attire at the moment was somewhat unacceptable. Deli was wearing a velvet robe embroidered with golden silk threads, a pair of boots made of dragon skin, and a hardwood staff inlaid with dragon crystals in his right hand. He didn't have his usual restrained seriousness, but instead, a cold and mocking smile. Compared to the fierce reaction of his assistant, Zhang Cheng's performance was much calmer. Instead of getting angry, he smiled and asked tentatively, "My dear Mr. Butler, don't you want to explain?" "Explain? Why should I explain?" Deli deliberately pretended that he didn't care. But in fact, from the subconscious vigilance of his left hand, it could be seen that he was still very nervous. After all, people with a little bit of common sense and magic knew that the most taboo in the process of a magic ritual was to be interrupted, especially a magic ritual that extracted a huge amount of energy. Once there was a mistake and the energy went out of control, it was basically a death sentence. "Hee, do you think this is enough?" Zhang Cheng slowly took out the last bottle of violet well water from his waist pouch and threatened. Although in the eyes of many, this liquid rich in arcane energy was just a consumable used by mages to replenish their own magic power, few people knew that it was also an extremely dangerous fuse. As everyone knew, the origin of magic in the world of Azeroth came from the Well of Eternity. Before the outbreak of the Ancient War, the level of magic in the whole world was far less common. It wasn't until the explosion of the Well of Eternity that countless well water were scattered everywhere that the prosperous magic era began. As a price, the former home of the Night Elves, where the Well of Eternity exploded, was left with an unprecedented scar, the Great Whirlpool. Whether it was the Sun Well, created by the High Elves, or the Half-Body Guardians created by the Tirisful Council, they were essentially the beneficiaries of the explosion of the Well of Eternity. This also meant that the small energy source that Zhang Cheng made with the Sunwell water was far from safe. This violet liquid actually contained many uncertain factors. Whenever it was mixed with other energy, it would often erupt with unimaginable power. He dared to guarantee that once this bottle of well water was thrown into the energy storage device not far ahead, the entire sky-towering tower, or even the entire old town, might be blown up into the sky alive. Deli was obviously not an idiot who didn't know anything. He was keenly aware of the pure energy contained in the bottle. His expression became serious on the spot, and he squinted his eyes as if he was hesitating. Chapter 244. The Shadowland Asha? Zhang Cheng repeated this unfamiliar, yet somewhat familiar geographical name in a low voice, a hint of surprise in his eyes. The reason was simple. Although the Shadowland, or the city of Asha, was almost never mentioned in the entire story of the Song of Ice and Fire, In fact, both the Shadowland and Asha were the most incredible places in the world. At the same time, it was also the southernmost part of the known world and the birthplace of the dragons. It was said that the place was shrouded in black shadows all year round, and it was impossible to tell when it was day and night. The land was also covered with ferocious and unusable ghost grass, making it difficult to grow any decent crops. The water, there was also an incredible black color. It was so black that even under the glaring noon sun, it did not reflect the slightest bit of light. As for the few blind and twisted strange fish that lived in the water, no one except a lunatic would want to eat them. It could be said that under such a harsh living environment, not many normal life forms could survive. Even livestock would die, without exception, before they could reach the real Shadowlands. Scholar Marvin, known as Magician, had once mentioned in a report that the deaths of these livestock were likely related to the Black River water. Perhaps it was filled with some terrible magic and curses. Asha was the only port city standing on the edge of the normal world and the Shadowland. It relied entirely on passing merchant ships to maintain its operation. The foreign merchants brought food, slaves, and water to exchange with the locals for gold and gems. Once the trade was interrupted, famine would instantly break out. Although it took a full 2 years to go back and forth from the free trade city of Pintos, and they had to face terrible storms and sea monsters on the way, it still could not stop the merchants from pursuing wealth. Some of them only wanted to make a huge profit, while others wanted to buy some special goods that could not be bought elsewhere, such as dragon eggs. The 3 dragon eggs that Daenerys had obtained had been purchased from this legendary city of Asha. Of course, the above was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that Asha was currently the only place in the world of Song of Ice and Fire that did not have an exact history of its origin. In particular, all the buildings in the city were made of similar black bricks, just like the towering tower in Dragonstone Stronghold. If anyone asked the locals about the origin of Asha, they would tell you that the city had existed since the beginning of the world until the day the world was destroyed. In Asha, magic was never a mysterious thing. A large number of people with supernatural powers lived here, including wizards, alchemists, moon singers, red priests, black alchemists, necromancers, cloud mages, fire warlocks, blood wizards, priestesses, night walkers, black goats, pale holy children, and night lions. If there was a place in the world of Song of Ice and Fire that still retained a large amount of magic heritage, it would be Asha. There was a time when Zhang Cheng wanted to go to Asha and learn from the magic users there, but unfortunately, he did not manage to do so. He never expected that someone who claimed to be from Asha would appear just as he was about to leave, and this person had disguised himself as a steward and lurked around him for nearly half a year. Derry maintained a cautious defensive posture and continued to extract the energy stored at the bottom of the tower. He smiled and replied, "That's right. To tell you the truth, my goal from the beginning was the towering tower, but I didn't expect you to see through its true purpose. That's why I had to take the risk and seize the energy to prevent you from using it all up." "What do you need so much energy for?" Zhang Cheng asked with narrowed eyes and a faint smile. "Sorry, that's my business. It has nothing to do with you. If possible, could you please step back a little? Being too close makes me nervous. I'm sure you know how serious the consequences will be if something happens to the energy under your feet," Derry warned calmly. It was apparent that Rode was using the exact same method to counterattack. It was as though 2 countries had nuclear weapons and could ensure the destruction of each other. Any rational person would not choose to start a real war with the other party. But it was a pity that Derry had underestimated the extent of Rhodes' madness and the terror of a person who pursued power all his life. The corners of Zhang Cheng's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a chilling expression. Then he gently tossed the flashing violet bottle in his hand forward. "Damn it! How dare you!" Derry roared in panic. He couldn't believe that this seemingly intelligent and rational young man in front of him would do such a crazy thing. Isn't he afraid of dying together with me? Perhaps he wasn't sure what the strange energy contained in the water was, but it didn't mean that he didn't know what kind of terrifying accident would happen when 2 completely different energies were mixed together. In order to prevent the terrifying scene from playing out in front of him, he couldn't care less about maintaining the operation of the magic ritual. He opened his arms and tried to catch the flask falling from the sky. Seeing Derry's clumsy actions, a hint of mockery flashed in Zhang Cheng's eyes. He suddenly released a bone-piercing chill in the surroundings with him as the center. Smack! In the blink of an eye, everything within a radius of a few meters was frozen in place by white frost. Derry was no exception. Taking advantage of the moment when Derry couldn't dodge, Zhang Cheng drew the magic sword hanging on his waist and pierced Derry's heart. His attack was fast and accurate, and in addition to the fact that Derry couldn't move at all, he easily achieved his goal. Feeling the excruciating pain in his chest and the life force that was constantly draining away, Derry widened his eyes in disbelief. He couldn't believe that he was killed so easily without even casting a powerful spell. Zhang Cheng wasn't in a hurry to pull out the sword. Instead, he took out the handkerchief that he carried with him and wiped the blood from the corner of Derry's mouth. He said with a faint smile, "Do you know that you've made at least 3 fatal mistakes today? Firstly, you shouldn't have been too eager to extract the energy. If I were you, I would have chosen to steal it bit by bit. This might be a little slower, but it's hard to be discovered. Secondly, you shouldn't have continued to maintain the magic ritual after seeing me. Doing so would make you a target, and I have several ways to get rid of you." Chapter 245. Don't be complacent. Even if I die, someone else will take my place to complete this mission. Remember, you're not just facing me alone, but a powerful organization. What's more, death is never the end for people like us. It's just a temporary stop and rest. It won't be long before I stand in front of you in a different form. As his life force continued to fade, Derry finished speaking intermittently. It was unclear whether it was a threat or a warning, and he slowly breathed his last. Just as his pupils began to dilate, a strange smile suddenly appeared on Zhang Cheng's face. Then, he suddenly pulled out the magic sword, bringing out a bright red color. This red color was not blood or internal organs. Instead, it was a blurry shadow, a soul that had just been dragged out of a body. Unlike the souls of ordinary people he had encountered before, Derry's soul presented a strange and dangerous dark red color. Even without any tests, Zhang Cheng could feel an unusual energy fluctuation. After discovering this, his eyes revealed a fanatical light. Without saying a word, he wrapped his left hand with magical energy and stabbed it into the soul's chest. Instantly, a high-pitched and ear-piercing sound erupted from the soul. "Ah! Damn it! Damn it! What did you do? Why didn't I return to Asia?" Derry's tone was full of fear and panic. He kept struggling to break free from the Soul Reaper's restraint. But unfortunately, no matter how he struggled, he could not offset the indescribable gravitational force. It was also this gravitational force that cut off his connection with Asia in the Shadowland. Weren't you very arrogant a few seconds ago, hinting that you would come back and cause trouble for me? Why are you afraid now?" Zhang Cheng sneered sarcastically as he tore off a small fragment from the soul and held it in his hand. One must know that the soul was the most important and essential thing of a person. Once it was injured, it would be disastrous. Not to mention other things, just the sensitivity to pain that was 10,000 times more painful than physical torture was enough to make most ordinary people collapse on the spot. There was no surprise. After feeling a part of himself being torn off, Derry immediately let out a cry that was louder and more painful than before. Zhang Cheng did not pay any attention to the unlucky guy who was in great pain. He used different energy attributes to test the soul fragment in his hand. After a while, he found that this thing had a strong resonance with negative energy, such as death, shadow, and so on. Pinching this small fragment that was constantly emitting a dark red glow, he couldn't help but mutter to himself, "Interesting, even the soul has been corroded. Is this the result of some kind of magical modification, or a side effect of living in the Shadowland for a long time?" At the same time, Derry, who had personally experienced the horrible pain of having his soul torn apart, finally stopped howling. His whole body was trembling. Suppressing his fear and anger, he begged in a low voice, "Let me go. As long as you let me go, I will tell you a secret." "Oh, what secret? Let's hear it first." Zhang Cheng curled up the corners of his mouth with great interest. "Do you want to know the origin of this towering tower, and who was the original builder?" Without a doubt, Derry knew very well that there was no room for negotiation at the moment, so he took the initiative to reveal a part of the secret hidden in his heart. Looking at the two flickering eyes of Derry, Zhang Cheng suddenly laughed out loud without warning. "Ha ha ha ha! My dear friend, you don't seem to understand your situation. Do you know the ability of the sword in my hand? It can devour souls and turn them into obedient spirits. Think about it. If you were to be turned into a spirit, then everything in your head would be mine sooner or later. Why do you have to use something that originally belonged to me to make a deal with me?" Without a doubt, this was a blatant threat. Although a soul-capturing envoy could devour souls and turn them into elusive spirits, it could not retain all the memories of the spirits when they were alive. To put it simply, the process of turning into a spirit was like a form of forced brainwashing. After brainwashing, most of the previous memories would be destroyed, and at most one or two of the most profound memories would be left. Unfortunately, Derry was completely unaware of this. He was so frightened that his face turned ashen. He hurriedly explained, "The original builder of the towering tower was a magus from Asia. He came from the same organization as me, but he chose to betray us because he fell in love with a woman from a deep-sea race. In fact, this tower hides a secret, and it can only be activated by extracting enough energy." Organization? Secret? Zhang Cheng stroked his chin, and a rather interested expression appeared on his face. He then extended his index and middle fingers. "Two questions. First, what is this organization that you keep mentioning? How many people are there in it, and how strong is it? Second, what is this so-called secret? Why do you want to obtain it by all means? Draining all the energy at the bottom of the tower. You will get the answer soon. As for the organization, I would rather be killed by you than reveal a single word. You have no idea how terrifying the organization is. Falling into their hands is 1,000 times, no, 10,000 times more painful than being enslaved by you." At the mention of the secret organization that he had joined, Derry quickly became unyielding. He had no intention of relenting at all. According to normal circumstances, either his loyalty to the organization was far beyond the limits of what one could imagine, or there was an unknown force restraining him, causing him to not dare to betray the organization. As a person who was half a step into the evil faction, Zhang Cheng was obviously leaning towards the latter. He was not in a hurry to continue forcing Derry. Instead, he lowered his head and examined the mysterious symbols and patterns carved on the ground. Soon, with Derry's wholehearted help, he finally understood these little things that were extremely similar to the Valyrian runes. He also tried to guide the energy and slowly infuse it into the hardwood staff that was inlaid with dragon crystals. Every time a part of the energy was absorbed, one of the dragon crystals on the staff would explode with a dazzling light. The moment the last one lit up, the storage container suddenly erupted with a series of crisp cracking sounds. Before Zhang Cheng could react, the oval-shaped pool made of black bricks exploded on the spot. The sharp-edged gravel scattered at an extremely fast speed. Maroya, who was unable to dodge in time, was directly pierced by countless stones. She was like a broken rag doll, ruthlessly slamming into the wall behind her. Blood flowed continuously from her wounds, and it was unknown whether she was alive or dead. Chapter 246. Zhang Cheng felt the pain coming from the wounds on his body caused by the sharp rocks. He stared at Derry, who was trying to hide behind him with a gloomy face, and asked with a cold smile, "You want to kill me?" "No, no, no. Please believe me. What happened just now was an accident, a misunderstanding. I have no intention of getting rid of you." Derry shook his head desperately and defended himself. However, judging from his slightly panicked reaction, he was definitely lying at this moment. Perhaps in his eyes, the explosion just now would definitely kill the young man in front of him, or at least seriously injure him. Unexpectedly, Zhang Qing's defensive spell was much stronger than he had imagined. Although it did not block all the high-speed rocks, it prevented most of them from hitting his vital parts. The most serious wound was only a scratch of half a finger deep near the corner of his eye. As for the shock wave that was giving great hope, it was completely absorbed by the magical shield and did not even touch the corner of his clothes. Oof. Misunderstanding? Accident? Zhang Cheng revealed a sarcastic smile and said to the Soul Reaper in his hand, "Teach him a lesson. Remember, don't break him. He is still useful to me for the time being." "As you wish, my evil master." Accompanied by the hoarse and deep voice of the magic sword that echoed in the air, Derry's soul immediately began to tremble involuntarily. In less than 2 to 3 minutes, he could not maintain his form and condensed into a bright red, transparent substance. Through the blurry human face on the surface, one could clearly see his hoarse roar, as if he was releasing some kind of indescribable pain. However, for some reason, no matter how hard he struggled, he could not make a single sound. It was this kind of extreme suppression with no outlet for the pain that made Derry fall into a state of incomparable madness. He even began to tear his own soul, trying to use eternal death to get rid of the torture. Unfortunately, under the absolute control of the magic sword, he did not even have the ability to commit suicide. He was quickly fixed to the ground. Zhang Cheng did not care about the process of the Soul Reaper torturing the enemy. He picked up the hardwood staff that had fallen to the ground and returned to the center of the explosion, carefully cleaning up the scattered rocks. After a while, he found a groove in the corner that was the same size and shape as the bottom of the hardwood staff. In order to confirm his guess, he gently inserted the wooden staff into the groove. Instantly, the dragon crystal, which was already very bright, emitted a dazzling light. Then, a large number of strange words slowly appeared on the ground, walls, and ceiling. Following that, the dusty ground suddenly cracked open, and a strange black statue slowly rose from below. The reason why it was strange was that the upper body of the statue was in the shape of a naked woman, and the lower body of a fishtail. Her face was full of sadness, and her 2 sapphire eyes seemed to be telling a sad love story. Anyone who looked at her for more than 10 seconds would be in a trance. Fortunately, Zhang Cheng was more alert than ordinary people. He quickly realized that he had been affected by some unknown magic. He quickly pinched his bleeding wound and used the pain to regain his consciousness. When his pupils began to focus again, he noticed that the female statue was holding a dark blue pearl that was the size of a pigeon's egg. It was constantly emitting a dazzling light. That unusual spiritual influence was the effect of this pearl. Moreover, when it appeared, the seawater that was quietly flowing in the surrounding grooves suddenly seemed to be affected by a mysterious force and began to make splashing sounds. As a mage, Zhang Qingning could acutely sense that the pure and enormous energy contained within the pearl might not be comparable to the crimson meteorite in terms of quantity, but its purity was several times higher than the crimson meteorite. Especially the unparalleled water elemental energy that surrounded the surface of the pearl. He could feel it clearly even from a distance of more than 10 meters. If this pearl was made into a magical item, according to Dalaran's technique, the power of the wearer's frost magic would be greatly enhanced. If it was given to a water elemental creature, such as Maroya's, the creature's power would be strengthened, and it might even be promoted to a higher form. Needless to say, the purpose of Delhi and the organization behind him was to obtain this precious blue pearl. Zhang Cheng carefully removed the pearl from the statue and held it in his hand. Through direct contact with the skin, he immediately realized that this thing was not solid as he thought. Instead, it was liquid and semi-liquid. It could change into various shapes under external pressure, but as soon as the external force disappeared, it would immediately return to its original state. Interesting. This is really interesting. Can you tell me what it is? Zhang Cheng asked without turning his head. The tortured Delhi's eyes were filled with fear, hatred, and hostility. After a full minute, he replied with a trembling voice, "It is the tear of the Queen of the Deep." It is said that the person who holds it can control the entire ocean, including seawater, schools of fish, and sea monsters. The reason why the towering tower can set off monstrous waves is because of it. As for the title mark on your hand, it is only one of the additional abilities it gives you. You don't understand its power, and you don't understand the meaning of its existence. The tear of the Queen of the Deep? It sounds like there is a story behind it. Zhang Cheng continued to probe as he tried to figure out the specific use of this thing. However, he did not know if the method was wrong or if there were some restrictions, but he could not activate the hidden energy within it all. As I mentioned before, the towering tower was built by a magus who defected from the organization and a woman from the deep sea. This woman was not just anyone, but an exiled queen. I'm not sure what happened exactly, but the two of them fell in love very quickly. They even planned to build a city by the sea and give birth to their mixed-blood descendants. Obviously, no matter if it was the deep-sea race or the organization, they would not allow the birth of mixed-blood children. They joined forces and launched an attack on one night. Although the defected sorcerer managed to repel the invaders with his powerful spells and the help of the tower, the queen was fatally injured. In her last moments, she condensed all her power into this dark blue pearl. As you can see, it is so beautiful that it is breathtaking. Anyone who knows about it would not give it up so easily. In order to ensure that the only thing left behind by his lover in this world would not be taken away by outsiders, the magus created a mechanism to protect it through the accumulation of energy over time. As long as someone dared to use violence, the enormous energy would explode and bury the tower along with the pearl. Fortunately, before the magus died, he created a key, which is the wooden staff in your hand. He gave it to his most loyal servant. Chapter 247. Under Derry's emotionless description, Zhang Chen gradually figured out the ins and outs of the matter, especially the origin and the builder of the towering tower that troubled him. He finally had a definite answer. At the same time, he also realized that the world of the Song of Ice and Fire was not as low magic as he initially thought, but the location of the story happened to be in an environment where magic was relatively scarce. In the more distant east, such as Yasha, which was next to the Shadowland, magic was definitely not something rare. On the contrary, magic could be seen everywhere there, and there were all kinds of spellcasters' organizations. If he could go there in person, it would be of great benefit, whether it was the construction of the magic theory that was still being explored or to absorb new knowledge and ideas from it. Unfortunately, he did not have enough time to complete such a dangerous and long-distance journey. He could only suppress his restless curiosity and turn around to speak to the frightened soul in a meaningful tone. "Dear Derry, can I trouble you to tell me how to use this interesting little thing? Since you came all the way from Yasha, you must know how to make it exert its power, right?" "No, I don't know." Derry shuddered subconsciously and shook his head desperately. "Oh, are you sure? You must know that lying is not a good thing, especially lying in front of me." Zhang Cheng gently stroked the sharp blade of the Soul Reaper and threatened. He did not believe that someone would risk their life to cross the entire known world and come to this tower that had been sealed for thousands of years without knowing how to use this so-called tear of the Queen of the Deep. "Damn it, don't force me. I can't say. I really can't say." Derry began to roar like a madman. Looking at the tormented eyes of Derry, Zhang Cheng suddenly laughed and comforted him while laughing. "Relax, don't be so nervous. I'm not forcing you. I just want to make a suggestion that will benefit both of us. You just have to tell me how to use it, and I'll release your soul. Don't worry, no third party will know about this except for you and me. What's more, after dealing with that idiot outside, I'll disappear for a long time, and the organization behind you won't know that you've revealed some secrets that shouldn't be revealed." "Really?" Derry opened his mouth wide in disbelief. As an unlucky fellow who had lost all his trump cards, and even his soul was in the hands of others, he naturally would not easily give up on this life-saving straw, even if this straw could break at any time. "Of course. You've been with me for so long. When have you ever seen me go back on my word? Not even once. So, you should trust me." Zhang Cheng pretended to be sincere and nodded. Even he himself did not realize that after half a year of experience in this world of ice and fire, his mentality had unknowingly completed a complete change. From the original cautious, he was now able to calmly analyze the mentality of his opponent no matter what the situation was, and then quickly make a response to make the situation develop in a direction that was advantageous to him. In fact, he had grasped Deli's eagerness to get rid of being controlled by others. He wanted to get the method of using the tear of the Queen of the Deep from him. As for fulfilling his promise, he had never considered it from the very beginning. This was because in his subconscious, there was always a yardstick that was used to measure the value of things. When the value of fulfilling a promise was lower than the yardstick in his heart, he would choose to generously fulfill the promise that he had made, regardless of whether it would cause his own interests to be damaged or not. However, when the value of fulfilling a promise was higher than the yardstick in his heart, he would not hesitate to show the other side, which was to tear up the agreement or even kill the guy who had reached an agreement with him. Whether it was keeping a promise or tearing up a promise, it was not absolute for him. He could change his mind at any time and place. The current situation was undoubtedly the latter. Derry obviously did not know that he had one foot in the abyss of death. He was still thinking about the days that they had spent together and what Zhang Cheng had done. In the end, he was surprised to find that the young man in front of him did not seem to have broken any promise. At most, he had added some loopholes in his words in advance. After thinking about this, he immediately proposed impatiently, "Give me a promise. Promise that as long as I tell you how to use it, you will immediately release my soul. I promise that as long as you tell me how to use it, I will immediately release your soul." Zhang Cheng repeated the other party's request without hesitation. The expression on his face was so sincere that no one would believe that this guy with such a face would soon tear off his disguise and reveal his ferocious and terrifying fangs. Good. Very good. After getting the promise that he wanted, Derry heaved a sigh of relief and began to explain in a somewhat vague tone. As you can see, the tear of the Queen of the Deep is a magical substance made of pure energy. We are not too sure how it is formed, but one thing is certain, and that is that only women can resonate with it. You mean, unless I change my gender, I will never be able to use it? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. Gender restriction? Was there any magical item in the world that was more incredible than this? According to Dalaran's basic theory, the reason why all magical energy would repel each other was mostly because the two energy natures were opposing each other. For example, holy light and shadow, nature and evil energy, and so on. The arcane spells that mages used were a relatively neutral energy. Not only could they simulate elemental energy, such as frost and fire, but they could also simulate various forms of energy, such as shadow, nature, and death. He did not understand why an energy substance that used water elemental energy as its main body would have such a bizarre situation as gender restriction. It was completely illogical. Yes, according to the records of the organization and my private research, it will indeed only resonate with women. The purer the woman's age and heart, the better. In addition, I suggest that you find a master for it as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you wear it for too long, it will have some kind of uncertain effect on you. That's all I know. You can now fulfill your promise and release my soul. After saying that, Derry's soul slowly floated up, indicating that he wanted to leave immediately. Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a strange light. At the same time, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he replied with a faint smile. "Sorry, I'm afraid I have to go back on my words. Eat him, soul collector. I've been waiting for your orders for a long time. You don't know how delicious his soul is. It's like a delicious meal in front of you. It's simply an unbearable temptation." The magical sword that had received permission made a rare joke. Then it released a cloud of thick black fog that enveloped Derry. Chapter 248. How does his soul taste? How was it different from an ordinary person? Zhang Cheng asked with interest as he admired the lifelike carving on the hilt of the sword. Even though he had read a lot of books related to necromancy and souls, he didn't have much in-depth knowledge in this area, not to mention distinguishing souls, which was an extremely complicated thing. This is a taste that has been accumulated over time, a dream of shadows and life. The soul-capturing envoy tried to express his feelings with an aria. Zhangqing obviously did not want to hear this. He immediately interrupted. Stop. Tell me directly how his soul is different from an ordinary person's. Speak human language. Try to make it as clear as possible. Fine. You really don't know how to appreciate things. You know, my previous master really liked it when I spoke like this. She thought it was very stylish, and it made her stand out from the masses. The soul-capturing envoy complained in a low voice. As the number of souls it devoured increased, its intelligence increased day by day. It even began to develop a human-like personality and was no longer as gloomy and scary as it was when it first awakened. But she's dead. Don't tell me you wanted to learn from a loser? Zhang Cheng asked, hitting the nail on the head. He would never forget the nature of the demon's sword, nor would he forget that it had tried to drag him into the abyss of darkness several times. Therefore, he always remained vigilant in his heart. The soul-capturing envoy was also very clear about this. He chuckled and retorted, So what if I'm a loser? Isn't there a famous saying in your original world? Failure is the mother of success? Losers are not completely useless. They also have their own strengths. At least from my point of view, she knows how to enjoy life much better than you. She knows when to be nervous and when to have fun. You have to understand that everyone's nerves have a limit. Maybe you can endure more than most people, but if you maintain your current state, it won't be long before you collapse. When that time comes, it will be too late for you to relax. You speak as if you know me very well. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and pretended to be disdainful. He was not an idiot. Naturally, he knew the importance of balancing work and rest. An appropriate amount of relaxation would not only allow his tense nerves to rest, it would also greatly increase the efficiency of his studies. However, the problem was that his current situation was not very good. To be precise, he was surrounded by danger. He was either surrounded by enemies who were eyeing him covetously or people with evil intentions. How could he let down his guard so easily? This was no different from suicide. All right, you're the master anyway. You have the right to choose. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Actually, there's no need for you to guard against me all the time like you're guarding against a thief. After all, our interests are tied together. Only if you're able to walk far enough in this dangerous situation will I have a chance to retrieve the most important part that I've lost, the soul-capturing envoy explained in a meaningful manner. An important part that was lost? Zhang Cheng keenly caught an important word. It's too early to tell you this now. I'll tell you the answer when you're strong enough. You just need to remember that the real test is coming soon. You'd better prepare yourself quickly, whether it's in terms of strength or mentality. Otherwise, I guarantee that death will not be the end, but the beginning of the pain. After saying that, the demon's sword seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber and did not move anymore. Zhang Cheng stood where he was, savoring the hint in the soul-capturing envoy's words. Soon, he smiled and muttered to himself, The real test? Come on then. I'd like to see who's behind all this and what's their purpose. There was no fear of the unknown. There was only a strong sense of expectation and desire. Even he himself did not know why he had such a feeling. It was as if what awaited him was not a difficult challenge, but an opportunity. Carefully putting away the tears of the Queen of the Deep, Zhang Cheng walked to the hardwood staff inserted in the groove. He reached out his right hand and stroked the dragon crystal that was constantly emitting a bright light. Then he sighed in a voice that only he could hear, What an interesting energy storage technology. If time permits, I'd like to go to Asia personally. What a pity. As the last word fell, he suddenly injected a surge of energy into the largest dragon crystal at the top of the staff. In an instant, the weak balance that was already very unstable was broken on the spot. The massive amount of energy stored inside was like a wild hurricane that spilled out from the staff, quickly forming a huge energy vortex with the staff as the center. Everything that came into contact with the vortex was sucked away and minced into a pile of debris that floated in the air. What was more frightening was that the vortex was still expanding as the energy continued to flow out. In just a short while, the foundation of the towering tower was shaken, and part of the supporting walls began to tilt and collapse. Seeing this ancient building that had existed for thousands of years being destroyed by himself, Zhang Cheng's face was expressionless. He only returned to the top of the towering tower before it completely collapsed. He rode on the Kolo Kelba and returned to the blue sky. At this moment, there weren't many living things left in the old town. Be it humans or livestock, more than half of them had turned into monsters that were pieced together from various corpses. The remaining corpses were scattered in every corner of the city. The former largest port city in Westeros had now become a land of death. These corpses of different sizes were in groups of 3 to 5, constantly patrolling the streets and alleys. Once they found traces of a living person, they would immediately charge forward and kill them, turning them into a part of their body. Unfortunately, Eric in his half-dragon form was the only one who could still barely continue fighting, so he naturally became the target of all the corpses. There weren't many parts of his body that were still intact. His entire right arm was long gone, and his legs were densely packed with terrifying black wounds. Even the tough dragon scales were unable to defend against the invasion of the death energy, and some parts of his body had even started to rot and emit a stench. What was even more frightening was that the death dragon was hiding behind a huge pile of corpses, jumping out from time to launch a sneak attack. Every time it attacked, it would cause substantial damage. At this rate, even if he wasn't killed, he would be exhausted to death in 10 minutes at most. Seeing this scene, Zhang Cheng finally revealed a cruel smile. Using a voice that only he could hear, he said, "Very good. It's time to start the last step of the experiment. You should know that not every necromancer has so many test subjects and such a large space for their first experiment. Let me see how powerful this thing is." After saying that, he threw a small bottle of dark green liquid down from the high ground. After a few seconds of free fall, the bottle smashed onto a flight of stairs and shattered into pieces. The dark green liquid quickly flowed down the stairs and into a mutilated corpse. In the blink of an eye, the corpse twitched violently a few times, then stood up shakily. At the same time, it released dark green mist from inside and outside. Chapter 249. So, this is the new magical plague developed by the Royal Potioneers Guild of the Forgotten? It doesn't seem to be very effective. Zhang Cheng frowned as he saw more and more corpses being awakened in the city. The reason was simple. Even though the green smoke spread through the air very quickly and covered the entire harbor in the blink of an eye, most of the corpses were slow-moving corpses. Only a few had successfully evolved into agile ghouls. Perhaps there were a lot of them, but their quality was not very good. Not to mention dealing with the Scourge army, it was not even enough to deal with the Alliance. Regardless of whether it was the mages with arcane power or the priests and paladins with holy energy, they could easily kill these low-level undead creatures. Just as he was feeling a little disappointed with the power of the magical plague, the first corpse that was infected suddenly changed. A huge and ugly tumor that looked like a mouth had grown out of the chest of the corpse. As soon as the tumor was formed, it began to devour the low-level undead around it. In just a few minutes, it turned from an ordinary zombie into a 3-meter-tall, amalgamated, loathsome demon. Although this amalgamated abomination was not as sturdy as a real amalgamated abomination, and some parts even had bloody intestines, it was no longer something that an ordinary person could deal with. Of course, this was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that some of the other living corpses had undergone similar changes. In less than 10 minutes, 30 to 40 hideous amalgamated abominations appeared in the army of undead. Unlike the amalgamated abominations created by normal alchemy and necromancy magic, they did not have any intelligence at all and would not listen to anyone's orders. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to kill every living thing around them. In fact, it was not just the amalgamated abominations. The awakened zombies and ghouls were the same. They passed through every street and alley, rushed into houses, and dragged out the civilians hiding in the houses or basements to kill and eat them cruelly. As the towering tower did not have a large area of effect, the survivors finally regained their consciousness. They stared at the hellish scene in front of them in disbelief. Whether it was the ordinary people or the soldiers who were lucky enough to survive, they could not help but hold their breaths at this moment. Even in their dreams, they would never have imagined that they would one day be surrounded by thousands of undead. Furthermore, these monsters were relatives, friends, or even enemies in the last second, but in the next second, they had transformed into another type of evil life form, the undead. Under the influence of fear and despair, everyone forgot to run or resist. They stood there stupidly, allowing the ghouls and zombies to rush up and kill them. Before they died, there was no pain or fear on their faces. Instead, there was relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. When Zhang Cheng heard that the screams coming from the city were getting weaker and weaker, he realized that the entire old town had probably become a city of death. In particular, the hundreds of thousands of dead souls wandering in the air caused the temperature of the environment to drop rapidly. In some extreme places, a layer of white ice had even condensed. This amount of souls and death energy was probably only comparable to when Arthas ordered the massacre of Stratholme when he was still a prince. As a demonic sword that relied on devouring souls to maintain its own strength, the soul-capturing envoy undoubtedly felt the temptation that was everywhere. He lowered his voice and asked, "What are you trying to do? Don't tell me all these delicious souls are prepared for me?" "No, of course not. I intend to create a loyal servant for myself, an executioner who can control death energy." Zhang Cheng replied meaningfully. "Oh, you mean to create a death knight?" The demonic sword's tone revealed its unconcealed surprise. After all, a high-grade item like a death knight could not be created casually. Not only did it require a perfect target, it also required an extremely complicated and cruel magic ritual. Both were indispensable. Zhang Cheng smiled and nodded. "That's right. But let me correct you on one point. What I want is not a simple death knight, but a death dragon knight. Did you notice the half-dragon that was riddled with scars? Pure dragon blood flowed in his body. I intend to fuse him with the death dragon and form a symbiotic relationship between their souls. This way, when I summon the dragon, I can summon him as well. How is it? My idea is not bad, right? It is indeed very interesting. What surprises me is that you have already learned how to make use of the loopholes in the rules of the game. However, please be careful. Magic, especially necromancy magic, is always filled with all sorts of unpredictable accidents and dangers. I believe that with your intelligence, it should not be difficult to understand the terrifying consequences of hundreds of thousands of vengeful souls going out of control." The demonic sword reminded without batting an eyelid. "Don't worry. As long as I have this, they will not be able to escape my control." Having said that, Zhang Cheng took out the Calamity Stone that emitted a sinister aura from his waist pouch. At the same time, he gave the order to the death dragon hiding in the shadows to attack. This huge fellow that was close to 8 meters long charged out of the shadows at a speed that could not be seen with the naked eye. It waved its sharp claws and grabbed the enemy's wings, tearing them off. Ah! The heavily injured Eric could not help but kneel on one knee and roar in pain. Fresh blood spurted out from where his wings had been broken. 2 giant corpse beasts, 3 sutured abominations, and a dozen or so ghouls took the opportunity to swarm him, throwing him to the ground. They pounced on him and tore at him, biting and slapping him. Even though the tough dragon scales had extremely high defensive abilities, they were not invulnerable. In a short while, there were a dozen wounds that were so deep that bones could be seen. What was worse was that the right hand that held the weapon seemed to have been smashed by the abominations with a heavy beam. He could not exert any strength at all. Noticing that his most important test subject seemed to have lost most of his battle strength, the corners of Zhang Cheng's mouth curled up slightly. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "The time is ripe. It's time for the final part. You must hold on, adorable little lab rat. If you die, all my efforts will be in vain." Just as he finished speaking, he raised his left hand that was holding the flint staff and began to loudly chant an incantation. Along with the chanting, A line hidden in the middle of the main road suddenly began to emit a strange green light, followed by a second and a third line that also began to light up. Chapter 250. Apart from Zhang Cheng, the mastermind and executor, no one would have noticed the strange pattern that had suddenly appeared in the middle of the city streets not long ago, let alone understand that it was the rope that hung around their necks. In fact, in order to complete this evil and complicated ritual, he had secretly started preparing for it more than a month ago. He had Maroya and her people draw a large number of magic runes in every corner of the old town, and these people did not even know that they had dug their own graves. Now, under the guidance of the spell, the originally inconspicuous runes began to work. When they were connected together, the land within a radius of a few kilometers began to rot, showing a gray and sickly appearance. At the same time, the plants were gradually distorted by the omnipresent death energy. If the previous frenzied killing had destroyed the civilization, then what was happening now was a death sentence for the land. There was no way to reverse the destruction of the earth by the evil energy and death energy, not even the druids, who were known as the guardians of nature. Once a piece of land was infiltrated by either of these two energies, it would fall into eternal pain. Whether it was the land itself or the plants and animals living on it, they would slowly become more and more violent and evil. Of course, as the person who committed such a terrible act, he could reap unimaginable rewards from the corroded land. For example, right now, Zhang Cheng could feel an endless amount of death energy beginning to gather around his body. It was so thick that even with the naked eye, he could still clearly see the constantly flowing black fog. If it were a necromancer or a warlock, as long as they absorbed this energy, they would be able to greatly increase the upper limit of their energy storage and magic affinity, and become a powerful spellcaster who would be revered by the people. But as the saying goes, you have to pay the price for what you get. If he absorbed a large amount of death energy, he would probably never be able to use arcane, frost, or fire spells in his life. He would only be able to use death, shadow, and evil energy as his companions. As a pursuer of power, he simply could not tolerate such a huge flaw. Thus, not only did he not choose to absorb it, he instead channeled all the death energy into the struggling Eric's body. Oh, no, 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 let me go. You King lunatic. Eric felt a cold and gloomy aura enter his body through the wound, and he immediately roared like a madman. After all, this was an evil gift from the contamination of a land within a radius of several dozen kilometers. It was not something that a mere draken could bear. As the surging energy entered his heart, the bright red scales on Eric's body quickly dimmed. For some reason, the red color gradually turned gray, and the eyeballs in his eye sockets began to dry up. After a while, they fell to the ground from the inside, and were replaced by two cold white lights. Cold and gloomy. Death. Hatred. What emanated from his body was no longer the flame that symbolized passion and life. Instead, it was a collection of negative emotions. Most importantly, his strong and powerful heart had stopped beating, and the blood in his veins had turned into a black, viscous substance. Anyone with the slightest bit of knowledge about necromancy would know that Eric's current state was definitely that of a living dead. In other words, he was somewhere between a living person and a dead person. Judging by the signs of life, he was definitely an undead, but his soul had yet to be completely transformed. Bastard! What did you do to me? Eric suddenly crawled up from the ground and questioned loudly. After experiencing tremendous pain, he undoubtedly realized that there was something wrong with his body, especially when the things in his eyes were no longer colorful. Instead, it was a strange scene that was either black or white. The living showed a bright white color, while the corpses and undead were dark gray. Other than that, there was no third color. Looking at the terrified and flustered expression on Eric's face, Zhang Cheng shrugged with a smile and replied, "What did I do? That's a good question, but I'm not too sure how to answer it. You can treat it as a complete transformation of your body to your soul, just like how you were transformed by that dragon. The only difference is that its transformation gave you life, while mine will give you the power of death." Sounds difficult to understand, doesn't it? Don't worry, once I complete the last step, you will understand how great of an experiment this is. As the last word fell, Zhang Cheng suddenly raised the calamity stone that had been transformed by the great wizards. The death dragon seemed to have sensed something and leaped up and pushed Eric to the ground. It opened its mouth and let out an ear-piercing shriek. When the tens of thousands of souls in the city heard it, they immediately passed through the layers of obstacles at an extremely fast speed and surged over. Staring at the densely packed gray, translucent souls that were like a tide, Zhang Cheng raised the corner of his mouth and sighed. How spectacular! No wonder so many wizards who studied death and shadow energy were unable to extricate themselves in the end. Who wouldn't want to have the power to control death and souls? But you resisted its temptation, didn't you? The magic sword, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly interrupted. No, it's not that I resisted its temptation, it's that I set my sights on a higher place. As the saying goes, you can only gain with loss. Giving up now is for the sake of gaining in the future. I intend to wait until I'm strong enough before starting to delve into this dangerous and taboo magical knowledge. As for now, it's enough to have a general understanding. Zhang Cheng explained meaningfully. Can you tell me what your goal is? The magic sword probed carefully. Zhang Cheng answered without even thinking, surpass. Surpass? The magic sword's tone revealed a trace of doubt. Chapter 251. Surpass everything? Should you be mocking your arrogance? Or should I praise you for having an ambition that is beyond the reach of ordinary people? The Soul Reaper teased with a faint smile. As a demonic sword that had devoured countless masters, it had seen many foolish mortals who slowly lost themselves after obtaining power. It had also seen maniacs who would do anything in order to pursue greater power. Therefore, it had long been accustomed to such remarks. In its eyes, mortals were always foolish. They would never stop pursuing things that they could not control. Whether it was power or power, they would eventually fall into the abyss of self-destruction. At least until now, none of the masters that it had followed had been able to escape from fate. It believed that this time would not be an exception. The only thing that it was interested in was whether this young man could surpass his predecessor and go further. Zhang Cheng was not an idiot. Naturally, he could hear the teasing and playfulness in the demonic sword's words. However, he did not get angry. Instead, he replied meaningfully, "It doesn't matter if it's arrogance or ambition. Time will prove everything. But do you still remember how you were created? Who is your creator? Is he or she still alive? You want to find out about my origin? Give up on that idea. Before you reach a certain height, you don't deserve to know the real secret. All right, instead of wasting time on me, why don't you hurry up and complete your magic ritual? That guy can't hold on any longer." After saying that, a faint light flashed in the inconspicuous groove on the hilt of the Soul Reaper's sword, as if it was hinting at something. Oomph! Deliberately mystifying. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and pretended to be disdainful. He then turned his gaze back to Eric, who was on the verge of breaking down. This unlucky guy no longer had the arrogance that he had at the beginning. He knelt on the ground and opened his arms as he let out a painful roar. The crazy influx of tens of thousands of souls made his soul, which had yet to be completely transformed, unable to bear the burden. It was as if it would be torn apart, devoured, and completely disappear from this world at any time. And because he had accommodated too many souls, he had completely lost control of his body. The two cold lights in his eye sockets had turned into white whirlpools, and from time to time, hideous human faces would appear. Even without getting close, Zhang Cheng could clearly see countless souls fighting, tearing, and devouring each other, trying to seize control of this body. However, none of the souls realized that in the process of devouring, some of their most precious things were rapidly losing, slowly forming a channel and bridge that connected Eric and the Death Dragon together. As the channel grew larger and clearer, about 1/3 of the souls suddenly collapsed, turning into silver flashes that filled the sky. The rest seemed to have realized something and fled in all directions crazily. But it was a pity that before they could run a few steps, They were firmly bound in place by the huge magic circle that enveloped the central area of the city. No matter how they struggled, it was useless. Looking at the fear, despair, and resentment that these ordinary souls were emitting from the inside out, Zhang Cheng revealed a rare, serious expression on his face. He raised his right hand that was holding the magic staff and began to concentrate on the most important and also the last step of the ritual. He would completely erase the personality and memories that originally belonged to Eric and create a brand new evil soul that was as white as a piece of white paper. In fact, the magic technique that he used was the result of the research that the great wizards of Dalaran had done on the corpses of the first generation of Death Knights that they had captured on the battlefield during the Second War with the Orcs. The essence was still within the scope of psychic magic, which was to use the death energy produced by desecrating the dead to give the corpses a brand new life, and then inject an evil soul into them. According to the standard procedure, Orc warlocks would usually first kill powerful human officers or find the corpses that they left behind for special treatment. Then, with the help of psychic magic, they would inject the soul of the Orc warlock that was accidentally killed into the corpses. In this way, a Death Knight with terrifying power would be created. In the past, with this magic technique, the Orcs had conquered cities and captured territories in the Second War and won victory after victory. The most well-known one was the first Death Knight that was born, Talon Bloodseeker. However, Zhang Cheng was obviously not satisfied with creating an ordinary Death Knight. This was because the humans in the Song of Ice and Fire world were not as physically strong as the humans in Azeroth. He had to make up for this in some way. Otherwise, even if he created a Death Knight, it would be a complete piece of trash. Of course, Eric, who had the body of a half-dragon, theoretically met the minimum requirements to become a Death Knight, but he still wanted to make his work more perfect and stronger, so he added a little change. As the souls dissipated in the air one by one, a dazzling silver light burst out. Eric, who was struggling in pain, finally stopped trembling. He knelt on the ground lifelessly. His eyes, mouth, nostrils, and ears constantly emitted a chilling black fog. Even the Death Dragon seemed to be affected. Its silver-gray scales completely turned black, symbolizing death. After a full 7 or 8 minutes, he suddenly trembled, then slowly stood up. He looked up at the sky covered by dark clouds and asked in a hoarse voice, Who am I? Where am I? From today onwards, your name is Shioma, and I am your creator and only master." Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and gave an answer that he had prepared for a long time. Shioma? Creator? Master? The newborn Death Knight was obviously still in a state of extreme confusion, and his face was full of doubts. Zhang Cheng had expected a similar situation. He smiled and nodded yes. "You were created by me. Look at the scene around you. All of this is the price I paid for your birth." The Death Knight subconsciously glanced at the ghouls, zombies, abominations, and huge corpse monsters that were all over the port area of the old town, as well as the twisted evil that was emanating from the ground under his feet. As if he had understood something, he knelt down on one knee and said in an extremely sincere tone, "Great Master, thank you for everything that you have done. From today onwards, I will be your most loyal servant, Shuma." "Very good. Bring your dragon to hunt. Kill everything that can move on the streets, whether they are alive or dead." Zhang Cheng gave the order without hesitation. Since the mission was completed, he naturally had to start cleaning up the aftermath, especially the highly contagious magical plague. If it leaked out, it wouldn't be long before there would be no survivors in Westeros. Chapter 252. After returning to the ruins of the Towering Tower, Zhang Cheng did not rush to start the last step of his plan, which was to completely destroy this city that was shrouded in death and hatred. Instead, he calmly took out his notebook and began to organize and summarize the problems he had encountered during his experiments, as well as how he had solved them. At the same time, he also compared them with the knowledge he had learned from books. After experiencing 2 worlds in a row, he had already realized that he could not simply and crudely use a set of magic system to deal with all the dangers. Every time he entered a new world, the power he had obtained from the previous world would inevitably be greatly weakened, limited, or even completely incompatible. The only thing that could be preserved was the knowledge and information that could be used for reference and reference. If he wanted to go further in this dangerous game, he had to find the commonalities between different magic systems, and then slowly build a set of magic systems that could be used in all worlds. Of course, innovation was never an easy thing. In fact, no matter what it was, innovation was not something that could be achieved overnight. So far, Zhang Cheng did not have any clues, so he could only start with the most basic accumulation of experience. As time passed, the originally blank notebook was densely filled with a large number of letters that the people of Earth could not understand, as well as all kinds of unique symbols and complex patterns. In order to prevent the notebook from being accidentally seen by outsiders, Zhang Cheng deliberately used several languages, including the human language of Azeroth, the High Elven language, the common language of Westeros in the Song of Ice and Fire world, the source language that he had obtained from the Children of the Forest, and the Valyrian that he had translated from the stone slab. In short, it was basically wishful thinking for anyone other than Link himself to understand the contents. Even with the help of some mysterious spells, it would take a long time to decipher the contents, and to ensure that the secret would not be leaked to the outside world. While he was immersed in the unparalleled complexity and destructive power of death and psychic magic, he suddenly felt a gust of strong wind blowing against his face. He raised his head and saw that it was Xioma who had come back riding on the dragon. The new Death Knight exuded an aura of fear and despair as he jumped down from the dragon's back. In his right hand was a Valyrian steel sword that he had picked up from God knows where. However, this Valyrian steel sword had been infected by the magical plague and death energy during the massacre. There were many black spots on the blade, as if it had been dirted by something. If a living person were to be struck by it, the consequences would not be as simple as a superficial wound. It would be accompanied by terrifying diseases and curses. Looking at the black and red ripples on the surface of a longsword, Zhang Cheng suddenly remembered that after the Duke of the Northern Region, Ed, was executed, Stark's family sword, Ice, seemed to have been obtained by old Tywin. He melted it and forged two new swords. One of the shorter ones was called Widow's Howl, and was given to the short-lived Geoffrey as a wedding gift. The other longer one was given to James. According to the original plot, James should have named the sword Oathkeeper and given it to Brittany. Based on the length and width, the Death Knight should be carrying the latter. It seemed that due to the fluttering of the butterfly's wings, Jaime Lannister did not give Oathkeeper away, but chose to keep it for himself. Unfortunately, a mere sharp sword did not help him escape from the terrible war and magical plague. Now that the sword had fallen into Xioma's hands, his fate was self-evident. Recalling the few unpleasant interactions between the two, Zhang Cheng could not help but sigh. He closed the thick notebook and asked in a low voice, "Have you dealt with everything?" "Yes, master. Everything has been dealt with." The Death Knight knelt on one knee and gave an affirmative answer. "Very good. Now, take your mount and occupy this island. Use slaughter and pollution to turn it into a kingdom of death. Kill anyone who tries to approach. Do you understand?" Zhang Cheng took out a simple sea map from his waist pouch and handed it over. "Understood." Xioma opened it and glanced at it, nodding without hesitation. He did not hesitate in the slightest. After keeping the sea map, he mounted the death dragon and soared into the sky, flying towards the ruins of Valyria. He did not realize what this action meant. Watching the massive death dragon turn into a small dot in the sky, a cold smile finally appeared on Zhang Cheng's face. Using a voice that only he could hear, he muttered to himself, "Dear Granada, since you yearn for freedom so much and want to break the seal that imprisons you, then I'll add an insurance to the seal. Let's see how long it will take for you to succeed without help from the outside world." There was no doubt that the island he had the Death Knight occupy was none other than the island where the Valyrians imprisoned the dragon. It was also the only entrance to the secret underground room. On one hand, it was for revenge. On the other hand, it was to prevent Granada from doing something similar again. After all, with his sensitivity to magical energy, once the Death Knight began to corrupt the ground, he would quickly notice. When he found out that the person doing this was the servant he had sent out, his expression would definitely be very interesting. Thinking of the old dragon's furious expression, Zhang Qing's face revealed a sinister smile. He carefully took out a sealed metal box and took out a stone that shone with a crimson light. He said softly, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's time to put an end to this." As soon as he finished speaking, he threw the stone the size of a baby's fist into the air, raising both hands and loudly chanting in the ancient language of Illyria. Following the strange syllables, the stone that was originally very bright bloomed with a strong light comparable to the sun. It was like a ball of raging flames, but also like a huge ball of light. When the light slowly expanded to its limit, a deafening sound suddenly reverberated in the air above the old town. Rumble. The thunderous roar caused the ground to tremble for a moment. The next second, the huge ball of light began to fall to the ground like a meteor, its terrifying might causing one to tremble in fear. As a caster, Zhang Qing knew very well how destructive this thing was. Without hesitation, he jumped onto Kelba's back and flew towards the sea. Before he could fly far, an indescribable ray of light pierced through the sky and earth. Whether it was the dark clouds above the city or the broken buildings and corpses on the ground, everything was reduced to dust in front of this ray of light. A terrifying energy storm with the point of impact as the epicenter tore everything within 2,000 meters into fine particles. Chapter 253. Zhang Qing nodded in satisfaction as he admired the scene of the energy storm destroying everything on the ground. He sighed in a low voice, as expected of the culprit that destroyed the Valyrian civilization. Even if it's just a small piece, it can instantly explode with unparalleled destructive power through magic. The only downside is that it can't be controlled. If it's not done well, it might even cause a disaster. Obviously, the Crimson Stone just now was a part of the meteorite that had been pried from the meteorite. In order to test the total amount of energy contained within it, he made a crazy decision to use the most extreme method to detonate it. That way, he could determine the amount of energy contained within the meteorite and, at the same time, clean up the severe consequences of the magical plague and psychic spells. It was killing two birds with one stone. It had to be said that the energy contained within this 1/30th piece of meteorite far exceeded his initial expectations. It was no wonder that the shockwaves from the impact alone were able to destroy the capital of Illyria and cause a series of disasters, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Even today, there were still some remnants of abnormal energy waves around the ruins of Illyria. Not many people who entered the ruins made it out alive. However, time was of the essence. Zhang Qing didn't stay for too long. He waited for the energy storm to dissipate before he rode Kelba towards the Shield Islands. Before he returned to King's Landing, he had to meet someone. A person he should have dealt with long ago, a true master strategist and schemer, Varys. After several battles, he clearly understood that the eight-clawed spider was a threat as long as he was alive. What he cared about wasn't money, power, or social status, but the strong beliefs in his heart. People like him couldn't be bought over, nor would they be moved by any benefits. They would give up everything for their beliefs, even their own lives. There was no doubt that compared to Pinky, who had clear ambitions and goals, Varys was the ghost that loomed over the skies of Westeros. That was why he had to die, for Zhang Qing to feel at ease. Without any hesitation, Zhang Qing immediately gave the order to attack when Kelba's massive body swept across the sky above the Shield Islands. Along with ear-piercing screams, balls of scorching dragon flame descended from the sky, scattering the remaining troops who had occupied the port and the castle. They did not even have the courage to fight back, and all they could think about was how to save their own lives. It should be noted that this mixed army had been forcefully put together by Eric using the power of a dragon. Their bones were filled with reverence and fear towards dragons. Coupled with the sudden appearance of the enemy on the Shield Islands, it meant that their evil master had failed to enslave them. If they didn't run now, would they be waiting to be buried with them? All of a sudden, everyone tried their best to squeeze onto the ships, wanting to return to their homeland in Eastern Continent. However, in their panic, they seemed to have forgotten that the ships were nothing more than slow-moving targets in the eyes of dragons. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen ships slowly sank into the sea amidst the dazzling flames. Be it the mercenaries who risked their lives for money or the fearless Dothraki warriors, there wasn't much of a difference between them now. They scurried around like headless flies, trying to avoid the scorching flames spewed out by the dragon. Zhang Cheng didn't pay much attention to the ordinary soldiers who had lost their will to fight. He went straight to the sky above the castle on southern Shield Island and signaled for Kulo Kelba to descend. He then jumped onto the empty castle walls. This used to be the fief of House Sire, but now there were only large amounts of dried blood and dozens of corpses hanging on the walls. Needless to say, these corpses were the direct descendants of House Sire. Perhaps it was to show off their strength, or perhaps it was just to intimidate the islanders. In any case, if nothing unexpected happened, this family was basically wiped out. In fact, it wasn't just House Sire. The Chester family of Green Shield Island, the Grimm family of Grey Shield Island, and the Grimm family of Oak Shield Island had all lost everything in the war. Even the men on the islands were gathered together as slaves to do heavy manual labor, while the young women were used to satisfy the bestial desires of the invaders. Roar! Kulo Kelba seemed to have discovered something. It suddenly raised its head and roared at a sentry tower. Zhang Cheng glanced at it subconsciously and patted its head with a smile. Relax, leave this to me. You continue to clean up the deserters. Remember, don't let any of them escape. Kulo Kelba nodded its huge head lightly, flapped its wings, and flew towards the mouth of the river. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared from sight. After watching his dragon leave, Zhang Cheng turned around and bowed slightly at the entrance of the sentry tower. He smiled and greeted, "Good afternoon, my dear Sir Varys. You probably didn't expect that we would meet again so soon, right? Don't hide, I know you're inside. By the way, the camouflage technique you're so proud of is useless against me. How did you find me?" Accompanied by a familiar voice, the eight-clawed spider pretended to be calm as he walked out of the sentry tower. He was dressed in a servant's attire, especially the belt around his waist, which greatly changed his body shape. At first glance, perhaps no one would be able to recognize that this was the plump and round intelligence officer of King's Landing City. Haha, how I found you isn't important. What's important is what I'm going to do to you next. To a certain extent, you and Count Peter Belisai can be considered my teachers. I learned how to play with schemes and power from you, but you seem to have neglected one point. Most of the time, schemes and assassinations can only be used to deal with ordinary people. For someone like me who possesses powerful magic, I only need to use pure strength to crush them. After saying that, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and made a clenched fist. In an instant, Varys, who didn't look very good, immediately knelt on the ground while clutching his chest. Sweat poured down his forehead like raindrops. He felt as if his heart had been grabbed by an invisible force and was unable to beat normally to provide energy for the blood in his body to circulate. Looking at the fear in Varys' eyes, Zhang Cheng loosened his clenched fist and said meaningfully, "See, this is power. The power to easily take someone's life. There's no need for a sword, no need for blood. The deceased may not even know who killed him. I respect your wisdom and your firm belief, but you made a mistake. You mistakenly treated me as an enemy, so I can only treat you as an enemy. When dealing with an enemy, I only care about the results and never care about the methods used. I understand. You're here to kill me, right?" Varys wiped his sweat when he felt his heartbeat return to normal. He raised his head and asked expressionlessly, "Yes." Zhang Cheng gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. "Is the agreement we reached before still valid?" Varys didn't seem to be afraid of death at all. Instead, he squeezed out a smile and continued to ask. Zhang Cheng hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's still valid. The old town has been destroyed, including all the residents, the allied noble army, and the sky-reaching tower. I will personally make a trip to High Court later and make House Tyrell history. Daenerys Targaryen, whom you support, will be crowned queen in King's Landing, and I will be her temporary lawful husband. Wonderful. Since that's the case, what are you waiting for? Kill me. Oh, don't forget. Hurry and send our old friend Lord Belisai over. I'll be lonely without him. Varys opened his arms and looked as if he was embracing death. Chapter 254. Varys is dead. His death was so quiet and unnoticeable. Apart from the two of them, no one else knew. Standing on the balcony of the highest room in the Red Castle, Zhang Chung, who was wearing a luxurious suit, could still feel the complicated feelings he had when he crushed Varys' heart with a psychic spell. Varys' face, which was full of relief, appeared in his mind from time to time. As someone who pursued power as his highest goal, he couldn't understand why someone would voluntarily embrace death instead of trying to escape it. After all, living was a strong desire engraved in the deepest part of a human subconscious. There was almost nothing that could compare to it. Only when there was a strong external stimulus would one have the thought of committing suicide. However, Varys clearly didn't belong to such a situation. He was so calm in the face of death, as if he had long expected his own ending. Just as Zhang Chung was troubled by this strange emotion, he suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw Daenerys standing behind him. This girl who had just been crowned the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms was wearing a milky white, low-cut dress that showed off her petite but abnormally perky breasts. The bottom of her dress was adorned with many pearls. Under the reflection of the firelight, it looked so pure and flawless. Coupled with a face that people called inhumanly beautiful, any man with normal physiology would probably be tempted. "Good evening, Your Majesty. Shouldn't you be attending the banquet below and placating those frightened nobles?" Zhang Chung quickly changed his expression and bowed with a smile. "Didn't you leave early as well? Moreover, compared to those fawning nobles, I wish to know more about my husband. Just a few hours ago, we exchanged vows, but as your wife, I realize that I know almost nothing about you." As Daenerys spoke, she stepped forward and looked up at the young man standing in front of her with her mesmerizing purple eyes. She still couldn't understand why this man refused her invitation without hesitation when she had the dragon, the army, and the city, but was willing to help her take back the Iron Throne after she lost everything. "Huh, understand me? Are you sure this is a wise choice?" Zhang Chung pursed his lips and asked with a faint smile. "How do you know if it's wise if you don't try? Am I that unattractive in your eyes?" Daenerys pretended to be playful and blinked her eyes. In fact, since returning to King's Landing, this was the 5th time she had tried to close the distance between the two of them through a heart-to-heart conversation. She had even revealed several times that she wanted to turn this superficial marriage into a real one. But unfortunately, every time he tried, the result was alienation and rejection. Today, on this important day of the coronation and wedding, she wanted to make one last attempt, whether it was to stabilize the turbulent situation in the Seven Kingdoms or for her own future happiness. Zhang Chung was not an idiot. Naturally, he could read the girl's repeated hints. He raised his hand and fiddled with the girl's silver blonde hair. Then he shook his head slightly. "No, on the contrary, I think you are very charming. But the problem is that you have to understand that a deal is a deal. It's best not to mix in too much personal feelings and desires. They will cause you to lose your sharp judgment. I mentioned before that after the deal is over, I will be going on a trip to a faraway place. So, rather than wasting your time on me, why don't you try to rope in the nobles who will be attending the banquet? A trip? Give up all my rights, lands, and wealth? Are you serious?" Daenerys revealed an expression of disbelief. "That's right. I've always been serious. Here, this is my signet ring and letter. With these two, you can gain the loyalty of all the nobles in the Riverbend area. The 3 most influential families in the area, Tyrell, Hyder, and Florin, no longer exist. As long as you put in a little effort, you will be able to firmly control the richest land in Westeros. Coupled with the territories around King's Landing, you are already a true queen." With that, Zhang Chung placed the things he had prepared on the table. Without any hesitation or reluctance, he tossed the signet ring away like it was trash Daenerys carefully picked up the ring made of metal and read the contents of the letter again. In the end, she asked in confusion why. Zhang Chung shrugged his shoulders and replied with a smile. In pursuit of power, my dear Majesty. Everyone has different ideals and pursuits. Some chase after power, some chase after money, some chase after fame, and some chase after enjoyment. But I chose knowledge and power. Everything else, including wealth and power, is just a tool to obtain power in my eyes. Now that I have what I want, they are useless. When do you plan to leave? Daenerys asked with a frown. She knew that the reason the nobles were willing to acknowledge her as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne wasn't because of the Targaryen blood flowing through her veins. Instead, it was because they feared Mason Asplin, who had supported her to the throne. In particular, the marriage between the two of them caused many people to dispel any thoughts of fighting for power. Even the Martell family, who had made outstanding contributions in the surprise attack on King's Descent, did not take the opportunity to make any excessive demands. However, if her husband suddenly disappeared, the situation that had calmed down might once again become turbulent. Tomorrow, I will leave first thing in the morning. Don't worry, I will have Kulo Kelba stay behind to help you stabilize the situation. With that, Zhang Chung waved his hand at the sky. In the blink of an eye, a large creature descended from the sky and landed lightly on the roof beside the balcony. Using its sharp claws and strong tail, the dragon fixed itself to the side of the castle and waited patiently for its master's orders with its beast-like eyes. Daenerys stretched out her right hand and gently touched the dragon's sensitive nose. Seeing that the other party did not show any obvious signs of rejection, she quickly relaxed and turned her head with a smile. You've done so much for me. How should I thank you? Why don't we spend this last night together? The moment she said that, she pulled off the straps on her shoulders and let her dress slide down her body. Chapter 255. Some people say that New York at night is always dominated by endless desires and sins. In places where the colorful neon lights don't shine, you would never think that something terrible is happening. As a young girl born in the Bronx, Camilla's daily task was to dress up sexy and beautiful, and then stand at the entrance of the alley to seduce those slightly drunk but well-dressed rich men. It would be even better if she was wearing a wedding ring. When the other party walked in and started to take advantage of her, her two brothers would suddenly rush out, holding up their cameras and taking pictures crazily while waving their baseball bats to threaten the other party. The purpose of this was simple, which was to force the other party to voluntarily hand over their cash and valuables through coercion. After all, most adult men with decent jobs and a certain social status would not want to be involved in a sex scandal, and even more so, would not want their family and career to be affected. Most of them would choose to pay. Of course, the most important thing was that Camilla was only 14 this year. Strictly speaking, she was still an underage girl. It was easy for the law, media, and public opinion to be biased. With this, not only did she successfully improve her family's poverty situation, but she also brought her two brothers on a path of no return. Excluding Manhattan and a few places where the rich gathered, most of New York would have gangs. Gangs meant the division of territory and power. For illegal activities like this, no matter where you go, you must pay tribute to the local gang in exchange for the other party's tolerance and protection. Otherwise, if a young and beautiful girl like Camilla dared to go out at night, she would have been dragged into a dark corner to be raped. Then, when they got tired of her, they would have thrown her onto the street to be a prostitute. Camilla was undoubtedly very clear about this, so she had never defaulted on paying her share. But today, for some reason, she stood in the cold wind for a full 3 hours without a suitable target appearing. Her face was full of anxiety and irritation, because if she returned empty-handed before dawn, it meant that she could not pay the protection fee. Not paying the protection fee meant that the gang leader who ruled this area would use this as an excuse to either increase the amount of protection fee or force her to do something she was not willing to do, such as selling sex. In short, in this place that was on the edge of the law, any shocking crime could happen. Just when the girl was about to take the risk of going to the side of the street to directly stop a car, One of her brothers suddenly ran over and pointed at the corner of the alley behind them. He lowered his voice and said, "Sister, look, there's someone over there." Looking in the direction of the muscular young man's finger, Camilla saw a handsome man with slightly pale skin wearing an expensive light gray tuxedo slowly walking toward the roadside. He had a bow tie around his neck and an exquisite walking stick in his hand. His steps were casual and elegant, just like a Renaissance aristocrat, full of a noble temperament. Even though she wasn't sure of the other party's identity, the girl quickly determined that the young man in front of her must have received a good education and was very, very rich. Even the somewhat old-fashioned leather shoes on his feet were enough to equal her monthly income. Damn it, this was a fat sheep. Go and get ready. The experienced Camilla quickly ordered his brothers. For a girl like her, who had lived in a poor and chaotic neighborhood for more than 10 years, she had long given up on the beautiful dream of Cinderella meeting Prince Charming. There was only one thought in her mind, and that was to desperately make money to change her fate. "Okay, leave it to us." The boy cracked an evil smile and turned to hide in a dark corner not far away. After noticing that her brothers had all hidden themselves, Camilla quickly unbuttoned the 2 rows of buttons on the collar of her shirt, revealing her rather large snow-white breasts. Then, she took a deep breath and stepped on her 8-centimeter high heels, pretending that she had accidentally lost her balance and bumped into the other party's arms. The pale-skinned man seemed to have noticed something and slightly raised the corner of his mouth to reveal a playful smile. Very gentlemanly, he opened his arms to support the girl and then said with a double meaning, "Be careful, beautiful and cute girl. It's not early anymore, and a lot of scary things happen at night, so you should quickly go home and sleep instead of wandering outside alone." "So sorry." Noticing the strange light in the other party's eyes, Camilla didn't know why, but a chill suddenly surged in her heart, and she completely forgot what she should do next. But even if she forgot, it didn't mean that her 2 brothers also forgot. The 2 boys who thought that the big fish had taken the bait made a prompt decision, one in front and one behind, to block the entrance of the alley. One of them very skillfully took out a camera and kept snapping pictures, while the other held a sturdy baseball bat and threatened loudly, "Hey, buddy, if you know what's good for you, quickly let go of my sister. Hand over all the cash and valuables on you. Otherwise, these pictures will be mailed to your home, company, and police tomorrow." "Oh, and then?" the pale-skinned man asked back unconcernedly. "F***CK, are you an idiot? Think about your reputation, family, and job. If you don't want to lose them, obediently do as I say." The boy scolded impatiently. "Ha ha, interesting. This is really interesting. I didn't think that after I woke up, the world would have changed so much that even such a young human child would learn how to scam others to gain wealth. Unfortunately, children, I have to inform you that you've chosen the wrong target. Also, I'm a little hungry, so I'll have to trouble you to become my food." Just as he finished speaking, the man who was obviously dressed in outdated clothing suddenly opened his mouth to reveal 2 sharp fangs, and his pupils revealed a blood-like glow. He did not even give the 2 boys time to react, and his entire body turned into a shadow in the air. In the next second, "Ah! No, 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 don't come over. Monster!" Accompanied by horrified screams, the 2 boys convulsed and breathed their last. Their bodies were as pale as a piece of paper. Without asking, it was obvious that all the blood in their bodies had been sucked dry. After doing all this, the man took out a handkerchief from his pocket and gently wiped the corner of his mouth. He turned around and said to the girl who was scared silly, "Do you know, I have a bad habit. I usually like to leave the main course for last. The sweetness of a virgin's blood is always something that no other blood can compare to. Thank the great ancestor for sending you to me, so that I can taste a delicious meal after waking up." After saying that, he casually threw away the white handkerchief that was stained with red spots and went straight to Camilla. Before he could open his mouth and bite her fair and slender neck, a chilling force suddenly tore through space and forcibly created a terrifying tunnel. Within a few seconds, a figure came out of the tunnel. Chapter 256. "Good evening, beautiful lady," And this handsome vampire gentleman, can you tell me where this is? If it's convenient, it's best to tell me what date it is today. The young man with the staff asked politely in English. He didn't show any surprise or fear at the pale corpse on the ground or the sharp fangs of the other party, as if he was already used to it. Who are you? Where do you come from? The vampire, who had just had a full meal, carefully maintained a safe distance as he asked with great vigilance. While speaking, his strong left hand was still holding the girl's neck. If he felt that something was wrong, he would immediately throw her away to buy time for his escape. As a member of the underground world, vampires were far more sensitive to magical energy than werewolves. Some could even use evil undead spells, so it was easy to judge the strength of a spellcaster. Putting aside the terrifying tearing of space, just the faint energy resonance in the air was enough for the vampire to recognize that this mysterious person who suddenly appeared was definitely not to be trifled with. However, the strangely dressed young man didn't seem to care about the vampire's reaction. He looked around the surrounding environment. When his eyes swept across the alley, there was a convenience store with dim lights, and his face showed undisguised surprise. Because through the dirty glass window, he saw the time and date displayed on the electronic clock hanging on the wall. It had been a whole week since he left. Obviously, this was none other than Zhang Cheng, who had just returned from the Song of Ice and Fire world after a wonderful last night. It had to be said that after months of experience, he exuded a calm temperament from the inside out. Even if the current situation was a bit unexpected, he didn't panic. After all, the last time he went to the world of Azeroth was only a few days, but this time he went to the world of Ice and Fire for more than half a year. It was completely reasonable for there to be a small change in time. If there was no change at all no matter which world he went to, then he should start to worry about how terrifying the owner behind the parchment was, and whether everything he experienced was some kind of illusion or reality. Although most people were subconsciously conservative and refused to let their surroundings change too much, for Zhang Cheng, who was seriously insecure, an uncertain change was actually a good thing. It meant that his choices and decisions were not manipulated or induced by anyone in secret. They were completely based on his own will. After figuring out the time he left, he shifted his attention to the vampire not far away. As for the girl who was being held hostage, she was ruthlessly ignored. As an executioner who had personally caused the deaths of tens of thousands of lives, he did not care about the lives of people who had nothing to do with him, even if the other party was a young, beautiful, and attractive girl. The vampire did not seem to notice this. He still thought that the hostage in his hands was of considerable value. As he slowly retreated, he warned in a low voice, "Stay where you are, Magus. Otherwise, as long as my hand exerted a little force, this girl's sexy neck would immediately break. Don't tell me you want to see a young girl turn into a cold corpse? Oh, why not give it a try? It just so happens that I've been researching necromancy recently. A corpse is much more valuable than a living person." Zhang Cheng spread his hands without a care. "Are you sure?" The vampire's tone revealed a strong sense of doubt. He was a little unsure if the concept of human society had changed drastically after falling into a deep sleep for hundreds of years. According to the standards of 100 years ago, most spellcasters would not watch a young and beautiful girl die in front of their eyes. Men called this gentlemanly behavior. "Of course. I'm very sure. Kill her. Hurry up. Otherwise, I'll do it myself," Zhang Cheng urged without hesitation. In order to increase his credibility, he even raised his left hand and began to condense magic. In the blink of an eye, a scorching fireball began to burn fiercely. It could hit a target at any time. "Damn it, I actually met a lunatic." The vampire gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. Feeling the waves of heat in the air, his strange blood-red pupils suddenly contracted. Without hesitation, he released the girl from his hands and turned to run towards the direction of the intersection. As a special species that relied on negative energy to maintain its life system, the thing it was most afraid of, other than the sun, was terrifying high-temperature flames. "Ha ha, I'm sorry, Mr. Vampire. Don't tell me you're delusional enough to think that you can still leave alive after seeing the way I appeared." Zhang Cheng laughed and flashed past the girl who was running towards him. Then he raised his flint staff and poked it on the ground. Smack! A dazzling white ice ring instantly spread in all directions with him as the center. It directly froze the opponent who had not run more than a few steps. Then he threw the fireball in his other hand forcefully. Boom! There was no accident. The huge fireball hit the vampire's back firmly. The huge explosion sent him flying into the air and slammed into the wooden electric pole at the entrance of the alley. Not knowing whether it was because the pole was seriously aged or because his body was too strong, the former broke and slowly fell to the entrance of the alley. The vampire, who had not recovered from the serious injury, could not react in time and was hit again on the spot. What was more terrifying was that the broken cable just happened to wrap around one of his arms and immediately released a terrifying electric current. Although the voltage in the United States was only 110V to 125V, which was far from the terrifying power of 220V, it was enough to cause considerable damage to the body of flesh and blood. In less than half a minute, the vampire's body started to tremble violently. Moreover, there were wisps of green smoke coming out his head. Without asking, it was obvious that he was electrocuted badly. At this moment, not only did the low-voltage electricity not save his life, but also greatly prolonged the pain and torture before his death. Out of curiosity about the vampire species, Zhang Cheng did not immediately kill the other party. Instead, he observed the reaction of the target when he was electrocuted and the speed of his body's carbonization with great interest. About 5 minutes later, the vampire's body seemed to have reached its limit. With a bang, he turned into fine, sand-like ashes and completely disappeared from this world. Only a black heart that was as hard as a rock and constantly emitted an evil aura was left behind. This was the most important organ of a magical creature, the vampire. If a noble vampire obtained it, he could use a special ritual to resurrect the dead vampire and make him his servant. Naturally, Zhang Cheng would not let this heart fall into the hands of an outsider. Therefore, he avoided the cable that was still at the point of no rest and kept it in his pocket. Chapter 257. No, please don't kill me. I swear I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. Woo-woo. Camilla, who had recovered from her shock, quickly struggled to get up. She didn't even care about the blood on her forehead as she knelt on the ground and begged. What happened in just a few minutes was far beyond the scope of understanding of a girl from the slums. Especially the strange way the vampires died, as well as the mysterious spells that should only exist in fantasy. She couldn't believe what she saw. She even thought that she was hallucinating. But unfortunately, the cold bodies of her two brothers on the ground kept reminding her that all of this was real. The two completely different and conflicting thoughts almost drove her crazy. Now that she had to face the threat of death, it was already a miracle that she didn't completely collapse. Zhang Cheng rubbed his chin and looked at the crying young girl with interest. After a while, he smiled and said, "Okay, don't pretend to be pitiful. I won't kill you, but in return, you have to do something for me." What is it? Camilla subconsciously covered her chest and showed an extremely nervous expression. Although she didn't know what it was, a woman's sharp sixth sense kept warning her. It's very simple. I have something that only women can use. You just have to do a little test. Not only will I not kill you, but I will give you a generous reward. For example, this, Zhang Cheng said as he put his hand into his pocket and took out a shining white diamond. Although this diamond had only been roughly polished, it was the size of an adult's thumbnail. There were no impurities in it at all. Even an idiot could tell that its value was definitely not less than 2 to 300,000 USD, and it was also a purchase price. If it was polished with high precision and made into jewelry, it wouldn't be surprising if it sold for millions or even tens of millions. For a moment, Camilla's eyes were completely attracted by the light of the diamond. She wanted to touch it several times, but for some reason, she resisted. In the end, she didn't even raise her head and asked, "Really? As long as I do what you say, I can get this diamond?" "Of course. You could take it now. I'm a generous person. I don't mind paying in advance." Zhang Cheng's face flashed with a hint of playfulness as he gently placed the diamond in the girl's palm. Oh my God! Feeling the texture of the diamond on her skin, Camilla's breathing suddenly became rapid. She knew the value of the diamond in her hand, and she also knew that this thing could change her future and fate. Noticing the undisguised greed in the girl's eyes, Zhang Cheng knew that the time was right. He took out the Queen of the Deeps in the wooden box and handed it to her. Here, take it, feel it, and tell me what you feel. This is Camilla S's hands, TSS, STT feels, TTT, TTT. She did not notice at all that Zhang Cheng, who had been standing next to her a few seconds ago, had silently retreated more than 10 meters, maintaining a relatively safe distance. About 2 to 3 minutes later, the Queen of the Deep's blue pearl-like tear of the deeps suddenly released a dazzling light. Strands of silver, translucent threads connected it to the girl. Before Camilla could figure out what was going on, her body began to age rapidly. Her originally tight and smooth skin began to loosen, and a large number of wrinkles and age spots crawled all over her body. Her beautiful black hair also began to show a grayish-white color. In short, in the blink of an eye, Camilla went from looking like she was 15 or 16 to looking like she was in her 70s or 80s. After this extremely strange scene ended, she could no longer stand and fell to the ground with a thud. She could not stand up with her own strength at all. Fear, anger, helplessness. She felt as if she had just run an ultramarathon. Every muscle and bone was aching, and she did not even have the strength to speak. Sigh, I failed again. I knew it wouldn't be that easy to find a suitable target. Zhang Cheng sighed in disappointment as he bent down to pick up the Queen of the Deep's tear of the deep on the ground. At the same time, he handed the diamond that had also fallen to the ground to the girl. Then, he turned and left the dark alley. The agitated Camilla tried to grab the corner of his clothes, but because her movements were too slow, she could not grab anything. She could only stare with her eyes full of despair and shout, "Wait, wait, save me. I beg you, save me. I'm sorry, Mississippi. I can't figure out the specific principles of the phenomenon just now, so I can't help you. Also, according to our agreement, if you help me complete the experiment, I won't kill you and will pay you a diamond as a reward. Now, we're even. As for the consequences of the experiment, naturally, you'll bear all of them. After all, as an American, you should know very well that there are often huge traps hidden behind generous rewards, right?" After saying this, Zhang Cheng did not stay any longer. He crossed the road and disappeared into the night. In fact, in order to figure out the specific function of the Queen of the Deep's tear of the deep, he had done more than 20 experiments, but none of them were successful. Every test subject was either sucked dry of life energy or had their soul destroyed and turned into a walking corpse. This magical item that contained pure energy seemed to have extremely harsh requirements for the user. The slightest mistake would destroy the user. Sometimes, Zhang Cheng felt that maybe he should just throw this dangerous little toy to Maroyas. Why should he spend so much effort to study something that he could not use? But when he turned his head, he felt a little reluctant. God knows if there would be some important knowledge and information hidden inside. Just as he was deep in thought and walking in the direction of the townhouse in Brooklyn, a silver-gray car suddenly stopped by the side of the road. Then, a familiar figure jumped out of the car. "My God, Your Excellency, I finally found you. You don't know how many big things have happened in New York these days. Quick, please get in the car. I'll send you back." The Pullman quickly opened the car door, his fat face showing an ecstatic smile. Chapter 258. Passing through the dark, narrow, and dilapidated streets of the Bronx, the car quickly entered the relatively bustling downtown area. Those who had never been to New York would never believe that the city was often more lively at night than during the day. Men and women could be seen indulging in sensual pleasures in front of various bars and nightclubs. Some of them were the elites from Wall Street and the darlings of the upper class who only wanted to vent the enormous pressure accumulated in their working lives. Some were from the bottom of the social ladder and were willing to become the playthings of the rich in order to earn money or find opportunities to change their own destinies. Through the glass window, Zhang Cheng observed this familiar, yet strange world with a scrutinizing gaze. After a while, he asked, "How did you find my whereabouts?" "Of course, I asked the Witch of Prophecy, Anthea, to do a little divination. You know, she is the most famous prophet in the whole of New York. No, in the whole of North America. So far, the accuracy of the divination results is as high as 60%. The Pullman gave the answer excitedly. Obviously, Zhang Cheng's return was simply great news for him. It meant that the previously designated plan could continue to be carried out, and he could completely get rid of the awkward identity of a cleaner. 60% accuracy? That's indeed an amazing record. You must have paid a high price to ask her to do the divination. Zhang Cheng's face showed an expression of interest. The reason was very simple. Magic such as divination and prophecy had always been known for its uncertainty. This was also why many magical worlds clearly prophesied so many terrible disasters. But neither the rulers nor the ordinary people cared very much. In fact, in most magical worlds, countless people tried to predict the future every day, but in the end, only 1.5 people could find 1 or 2 vague fragments from the long river of time, and then, based on their own guesses and imaginations, draw what would happen a few months, a few years, decades, or even hundreds or thousands of years in the future. As for the rest, it was just confusing dreams with reality, with so many wrong prophecies. Any ruler would easily believe the prophecies of a so-called prophet, unless he repeatedly proved how accurate his prophecies were. Although in other fields, a success rate of 60% could only be considered a passing grade. In the field of prophecy, this was already the standard of a master. Zhang Cheng had long heard that Anthea was a witch whose influence was comparable to Catherine's, but it was only today that he learned that she had such an accurate prophecy ability. Everyone would inevitably encounter problems, such as finding people or things, so her importance was self-evident. Perhaps many big shots in the council would need her help, and her status would naturally rise. The only thing that worried Zhang Cheng was whether this witch of prophecy would be able to predict his true origins, as well as his unbelievable experiences. If he could, should he find a way to get rid of him as soon as possible, or should he find an opportunity to have an open discussion and see if they could reach an agreement that would benefit both sides? The Pullman obviously did not know that the master he swore allegiance to was considering a very serious problem. He smiled and shook his head. "No, sir. Anthea and I did not make any excessive demands. We just hope that you can take the time to meet her. She seems to be very interested in some of your potions." "Oh, what potion?" Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a strange look that was hard to detect. "It's the wisdom potion. To be exact, the spellcasters in New York's underworld now know that you can use alchemy to create an alchemy potion that can make one's mind clearer and sharper. Even Senator Miles, who is nearing the end of his life, has sent someone to invite you to discuss the secrets of alchemy with him before he dies." When he said this, the Pullman's face was filled with excitement and anticipation. No one knew better than him the huge sensation that the wisdom potion would cause after it was released into the market. As long as he could continuously produce this potion, it would be equivalent to gaining the friendship of thousands of spellcasters. As a manager and operator, not only could he obtain unimaginable benefits, but he could also change his status from a lowly cleaner to a lord's servant and butler. This was not to be underestimated. According to the strict hierarchy in the underworld, a cleaner was the lowest ranking member in the underworld. They were the coolies that would clean up the messes of others whenever they were called upon. No matter how respectable they were in the modern society and how much wealth they had, they could only obey orders obediently. On the other hand, a lord's butler and servant was equivalent to a high-level manager. On one hand, they would assist in the management of various matters in the territory. On the other hand, they would also have to give advice to the lord that they were loyal to. If someone wanted to harm them, they would have to get the lord's permission first. Otherwise, it would be seen as a provocation, and it might even lead to a war between territories. The wisdom potion. Zhang Cheng rubbed his chin as he pondered. He did not expect that out of all the low-level magic potions that he had made, the most popular one was the wisdom potion. After all, The potion only required 1 portion of demonic emperor herb and 2 portions of heathergrass. The effect of consuming the potion was only to slightly increase the brain's memory and sharpness for an hour. It was far less effective than the arcane wisdom potion. After trying the potion for the first time, he lost interest in it. However, what Zhang Cheng did not expect was that the potion that he thought of as useless had caused such a huge reaction in the underworld. If he could make a more powerful wisdom potion, wouldn't he be able to use it as a condition to exchange something useful with the upper echelons of the parliament? Thinking of this, a playful smile appeared on his face. He then said, "You mentioned that a lot of things happened when I was away. Since we have time now, let's talk about it. I hope there won't be any big trouble." Hee hee. There won't be any big trouble, but there are a lot of small ones. For example, your fish bait seems to be being pursued by a guy of unknown origin. It seems like it won't be long before it falls into his hands. You'd better be careful, Pullman hinted without turning his head. Is that so? Seems like a fish has taken a bait. Have you checked the background of the guy? Zhang Cheng asked with his eyes glowing. Richard Fair. On the surface, he is a senior advisor of an investment company. However, he is secretly a devil worshipper. According to the records of the North American Regional Assembly, he has committed horrifying crimes in Boston, San Francisco, and Detroit. He is now wanted, and there is a valuable bounty on his head. As he spoke, Pullman took out a printed document from his briefcase and handed it over. Chapter 259. Demon worshippers, as the name implied, were humans who were crazy about the power and behavior of demons. They were not bound by any laws or morals, and they did not care about good or evil. They only wanted to obtain forbidden knowledge and power from demons, and through a terrifying ritual called demonization, they wanted to get closer to the demon form until the day the demon accepted them as one of its kind. Of course, according to the records of the Parliament, in the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, there were only a handful of humans who had successfully integrated into demons. There were no more than 20 of them, and each of them was a criminal who had committed heinous crimes in history. Even some demons were not as bad as them. Zhang Cheng, who had only killed hundreds of thousands of people and turned a city into a land of death, was not even comparable to the last one among these people. Perhaps the demons used this kind of naked temptation to arouse the desires and dark side hidden in the depths of human hearts to achieve the goal of influencing the entire society. However, demon worshippers did not know that only less than 1 in 100,000 or even 1 in a million of them could succeed. The rest were only chess pieces used by the demons, and they would be abandoned after losing their value. Obviously, this Richard fill in the information was one of the tens of thousands of demon worshippers hidden in the crowd. He might have heard about what happened not long ago and wanted to take the opportunity to win the favor of Demon Boren. He planned to sacrifice the soul of poor Gracie to the demon in exchange for benefits. Although Zhang Cheng's initial wish was to use the bait to catch a big fish, now it seemed that before the big fish took the bait, the small fish had already emerged. Out of strong curiosity, he decided to study the demon worshippers first so that he could have a better understanding of the mysterious species in the legends. At the same time, he could figure out whether the devils or demons in the various magic worlds all originated from the same place or were different branches born from somewhere in the universe. The Pullman's car drove fast and steadily. It slowly stopped at the side of the villa about 25 minutes later. Just as Zhang Qing got up and opened the door, planning to return to his residence to summarize his gains in the past 6 months, he suddenly saw a silver-gray convertible sports car not far in front of him. A group of men and women stood next to the car. The woman was none other than the young Gracie. Needless to say, the man must be the devil worshipper who was actively attacking her, Richard Fill. The man was about 35 years old. He had sharp facial features and dark green eyes. While whispering mushy words of love, he gently sniffed the girl's hair. The girl, who was in a daze, seemed to have completely lost the ability to resist. She allowed the man to undo the buttons on her chest and take off her white shirt, revealing her tempting skin and snow-white breasts underneath. However, unlike most lecherous men, Richard Fair did not pounce on the girl's sensitive parts to pave the way for completing the home run next. Instead, he glanced at her right shoulder. When he saw a claw-shaped red mark, his eyes flashed with a terrifying red light, like a wild beast that had found its prey. He subconsciously licked his lips. It seems like this little fish is really hungry and thirsty. But don't worry, I'm not ready yet. You still have to continue to endure for a few more days. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and smiled playfully. He immediately walked out of the car, went straight to the two, and said in an indifferent tone, "I'm sorry, both of you. Although I don't want to disturb you, I need this lady to help me open the door to go home. So please stop here for today. If you feel like it's not enough, you can go into the house and find a room to continue. I don't mind." Mr. Zhang, when did you come back? No. Where did you go for a whole week? Also, what's with your strange clothes? Did you go to a medieval costume party? Gracie, who suddenly recovered from her trance state, quickly pushed her boyfriend away and quickly pulled her shirt close to cover her exposed chest. Dear, you have too many questions. Please remember, I don't need to explain anything to you, and you don't have the right to ask about me. Do you understand? Zhang Cheng warned with a cold face. Before Gracie could say anything, Richard finally couldn't help but pretended to be angry and scolded. Hey, boy, be polite when you talk to a lady. Didn't your parents teach you basic etiquette? Oof, idiot. If I were you, I would immediately turn around and run away instead of staying to be a tough guy. With that, Zhang Cheng slightly released a part of the magical energy in his body. Who are you? Richard's pupils suddenly shrank, and he nervously asked loudly. If it weren't for the fear of scaring away the girl beside him, he might have immediately chosen to show his other side to deal with the threat in front of him. Relax. Don't be nervous. While I still have some patience, immediately disappear from my sight. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Zhang Cheng didn't hesitate to give the ultimatum. Richard glanced at Tracy, who had no idea what was going on, and hesitated for a few seconds. In the end, he gritted his teeth and whispered something into the girl's ear. He then turned around and drove his flashy chartered car into the night. Watching this small fish out of sight, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and pretended to be disdainful and said sarcastically, "This is your new boyfriend? Damn it, why did you treat him like that? Could it be that you were jealous?" Tracy rolled her eyes in annoyance. Without a doubt, she didn't know anything about the secret confrontation just now and didn't understand that she was currently in an extremely dangerous situation. Jealous? No. You don't seem to understand your situation. Forget it. Why am I telling you this you don't understand? All right, stop talking nonsense and quickly open the door. I can't wait to take a bath, eat something, and sleep. Zhang Cheng impatiently urged the girl. The latter sighed helplessly and took out the key to open the villa's door. The two entered the living room one after the other. Tracy casually kicked off her high heels and asked without turning her head, "Mr. Wizard, do you believe in love at first sight?" Chapter 260. My God, where did you hear all this from? How come I've never heard of it before? Tracy raised her head and stared at Zhang Cheng, dumbfounded. She would never have dreamed that she would be able to hear the words genes, cells, bacteria, and viruses from the mouth of a magus who possessed such powerful magical powers. After all, in her eyes, even if magic and technology were not at odds with each other, they should not be related at all. But now a magus was actually talking about the results of cutting-edge biotechnology research that even she did not know about. She could not help but feel a sense of absurdity. Zhang Cheng was undoubtedly very clear about the girl's thoughts. He smiled and asked, "Why, in your eyes, should I be the kind of weirdo who hides in the basement all day, using a dirty pot to cook all sorts of disgusting things? No, my dear Tracy, magic is not the primitive, superstitious, ignorant, and barbaric power that you think it is. On the contrary, it is a kind of complex knowledge and skill that requires a long period of study and experimentation to master. It is a kind of knowledge that is more ancient and profound than modern science. You can understand it as a kind of fringe science." Fringe science. The corner of Tracy's mouth couldn't help but twitch. She took off her jacket and skirt and changed into a loose gray t-shirt. She casually sat on the sofa and turned on the TV. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but she did not care about the large extent of exposure during the process of changing clothes. It was as if this was her own home. Zhang Cheng did not expose the girl's thoughts. While walking towards the bedroom upstairs, he very casually explained, "That's right. So I have never seen magic and science as two opposing systems, but rather as mirrors that can be used for reference. When magic research reaches a bottleneck, I will try to think from the perspective of modern science. Oh, I almost forgot. For safety reasons, I suggest you stay away from your new boyfriend. He is not as simple as he looks." "What do you mean? You think there is a problem with Richard?" Tracy was obviously stunned. "Yes. I don't know if he has told you before, but he and I are actually the same kind of people. I believe you should understand the meaning of this sentence." After saying that, Zhang Qing walked straight through the stairs and corridor and returned to his bedroom. He then locked the door with a click. Tracy, who was left alone in the living room, heard the sound of the door closing. He suddenly stood up from the sofa and cursed angrily. "Sage asterisk T. I knew there was something wrong with Richard. How could a rich, handsome, humorous, witty man like him fall in love with me for no reason?" It turned out that they were all hiding unspeakable secrets. Bastard, bastard, bastard. Zhang Cheng shook his head with a smile when he heard the sound of something being smashed outside the door. He took out the mysterious parchment from his pocket and muttered to himself in a low voice, "All right, now let me see the harvest of this adventure." He saw that the originally empty sheepskin was now densely packed with lines of tiny words. Quest, Game of Thrones completed. Not only did you successfully help the exiled Daenerys ascend to the Iron Throne through a series of methods, but you also became her legal husband. Overall evaluation, excellent. Reward, Azeroth class, Mage, 10 levels. Quest Dragon. You have successfully hatched 2 dragon eggs and received the spell Dragon's Oath. You can summon a dragon that you have signed a contract with at any time. Quest Child of the Forest. You have not discovered the true source of the Child of the Forest magic. You have only obtained a small amount of information from a captive. Quest failed. Quest Overcome magic addiction. Although you have used opportunistic methods to temporarily overcome the problem of magic addiction, this can still be considered as completing the quest. Reward, Magic Pouch. As he finished reading the last word, a large amount of arcane energy surged into his body, continuously transforming every inch of his cells and muscles. The originally narrow magic circuits were widened so that more energy could be gathered when casting spells, thus achieving the goal of increasing the power of the spells. In reality, Azeroth's mages were not like in the game, where the same spell was cast according to the power of the spell. Instead, the damage of the spell was determined by the amount of energy gathered when casting the spell. The width of the magic circuits in a mage's body determined the maximum power of the spell cast. Only when the magic circuits were wide enough could a mage cast high-level spells. After the surging arcane energy gradually subsided, Zhang Cheng found that 2 new skills had appeared in his mind: Portal and Mana Topaz Creation. At the same time, he also gained a few talent points. Including his previous accumulation, his current mage level should be around level 50 in the game. Obviously, absorbing a new type of magic in the Song of Ice and Fire world was a great help to his mage level. In particular, the upper limit of the energy stored in his body had been greatly increased. If a normal Dalaran mage's mana value was 10, then his was 18 or even 20. After a few weeks of training, he had mastered the method of storing more than 2 types of energy in his body at the same time. Now, he only needed a few bottles of well water to allow the arcane energy and the mysterious energy of the Song of Ice and Fire to coexist and use one of them according to his needs. This also meant that he could cast more than twice as many spells as most mages of the same level, and his advantage in battle was self-evident. There was no hesitation. Zhang Cheng continued to follow the plan he had previously formulated and put the points he had just received into his frost talents. Enhanced Blizzard, Enhanced Icicle, Shattered Ice, one after another talents that could greatly increase his combat power were added. The most important thing was that he had finally obtained the ultimate frost talent that he had always dreamed of, Ice Shield. With this, he did not have to worry too much about arrows, guns, and other long-range weapons in battle. As long as the ice shield was still there, no physical or magical attacks could directly hurt the mage's fragile body. In a chaotic battle, he also had enough time to react. As for the remaining points, he put them all into his arcane talent. In one breath, he put arcane vitality, a talent that was regarded as useless by players in the game. In an instant, a layer of weak energy shield that could not be seen by the naked eye covered the surface of his skin from all directions without any blind spots. Although it was far inferior to the mana shield and ice shield in terms of physical defense, it was still the last barrier to protect his life. After all, reality was not a game. If he died, he could run back to his corpse. In order to protect his life as much as possible, Zhang Cheng did not mind, even if it was the weakest protection. Chapter 261. That's right. This is the power I want. But it's not enough. I need more. More. Zhang Cheng muttered to himself as he clenched his fists. Just as he was immersed in the great joy of the increase in his power, a brown leather bag the size of a lady's makeup bag appeared in his palm. There was a leather string at each end to fix it. Needless to say, this must be the magic waist bag that could carry a volume of no more than 10 cubic meters and a weight of no more than 100 kilograms. Driven by strong curiosity, Zhang Cheng first threw the parchment on the table and carefully looked at the somewhat dirty and shabby leather container. It did not feel like an extremely rare magic container at all, but more like a garbage bag for storing junk. It should be known that even in the highly technologically advanced magic kingdom of Dalaran, a magic container that could reduce the volume of an item was very rare. Most of the backpacks carried by mages could only reduce the weight by 20 to 40%. As for reducing the volume, only a few archmages who had made great contributions to the Kirin Tor Parliament were qualified to receive it. However, when he put one of his hands into the belt, his face quickly showed undisguised surprise, because what he touched inside the bag was not some tanned leather, but a piece of space fragment that had been cut off from an unknown place. In other words, the leather waist bag itself was just a disguise, an entrance, and a passage. The unknown space fragment that was tied together with the backpack was the main body. Interesting. This is really interesting. Perhaps this is the biggest reward of my adventure. Zhang Cheng was wild with joy as he grabbed the things on the table and tirelessly put them in and took them out. He felt the barrier that was created when he passed through the passage. He did not notice that there was a line of inconspicuous letters hidden inside the waist bag, and these letters were something he had never seen before. After about an hour or two, the fatigue and sleepiness gradually calmed down his originally excited nerves. After locking all the important things in the basement, Zhang Cheng drank 2 or 3 bottles of well water to ensure that there was enough arcane energy in his body. He took a shower and went back to sleep. When he woke up the next day, the sun was already past noon. It was shining through the gaps of the blinds, so bright that he could not open his eyes. Damn it, I actually overslept. As he rubbed his eyes, he quickly got up from the bed, washed up, and put on modern clothes as quickly as possible. He then went straight to the greenhouse behind the villa that was full of herbs. After all, he had been away for an entire week. He was eager to see how the seeds he had planted were growing, especially the dream leaf grass and mountain raggrass that he had purchased at a high price. These 2 important alchemy materials were not like the ones in the game, where they would be refreshed every 40 minutes in several high-level maps. They were so rare that experienced herb gatherers had to avoid all kinds of terrifying monsters and search for them in the depths of the uninhabited wastelands. They would only have a little stock every few months. It could be said that apart from the Cenarian Circle, which was made up entirely of druids, there was no other organization on the Azeroth continent that could provide large amounts of high-level herbs. The reason was simple. The higher the grade of the herb, the harsher the environment for its growth, and the more magic energy it needed to absorb. Both were indispensable. Although Zhang Cheng had used the special soil from the Goro crater and the evergreen pouch invented by the druids to grow these herbs, he was still a little worried. However, This worry completely disappeared after he pushed open the door of the greenhouse. It was replaced by a face full of joy. The originally empty land was now filled with colorful plants and flowers. Most of them were peace bloom. The white sea of flowers densely covered nearly a quarter of the greenhouse. Beside the peace bloom were large amounts of silverleaf grass and earthroot grass. Due to the strong energy radiation that the well water continuously released, these low-level herbs that were originally growing very quickly had entered the harvest stage. If nothing unexpected happened, he would not need to worry about low-level alchemy materials for a long time. As for the higher-level herbs like heathergrass, wild steelflower, golden thorngrass, winter thorngrass, and codgar's beard, many of them had also entered the mature stage. They could be harvested in another 2 days. Finally, and most importantly, the mountain rat grass, dream leaf grass, and Grom's blood in the corner had also successfully broken through the soil. They did not wither and die due to lack of care. Admiring the greenhouse full of herbs, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and said in a meaningful tone, "The time is finally ripe. It's time to take action and make contact with those high and mighty people. At the same time, we can test how deep the waters of this world are." As soon as he finished speaking, he picked up the tools he needed to gather the herbs and began to gather the materials he needed. He then brought them back to his room and calmly mixed them. 2 to 3 hours later, a few bottles of new potions that had never appeared in this world were placed in glass test tubes. Due to the limitations of his alchemy skills, he was unable to mix potions that were too high level. He could only make a few strengthening potions, such as secondary invisibility, super troll's blood, freedom of movement, ogre's strength, and agility potions. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but when he finished sealing the last bottle, the Pullman's voice came from outside the closed door. "Sir, I just received news that Councilman Miles, who was in a coma, suddenly woke up 15 minutes ago. He wishes to meet you immediately." "Oh, now?" Zhang Cheng carefully inserted the time that was emitting a mesmerizing luster into the shelf. His eyes revealed a hint of strangeness. "Yes, you'd better put down your work and come with me. You have to know that this meeting is unusual. It may involve a lot of secrets, and even the upcoming war game that will sweep through Brooklyn." The Pullman's tone revealed an unprecedented tension and seriousness. He was very clear that this was an opportunity, a real opportunity to soar. Although there were risks involved, the rewards would definitely be bountiful. If that's the case, then what are we waiting for? Let's go. I can't wait to meet this Councilman Miles and personally ask him about the mysteries of alchemy. Zhang Cheng didn't hide his desire for knowledge and power at all. After installing the potion shelf on the table, he followed the Pullman into the car. Not long after he left, Tracy, who didn't sleep for the entire night, secretly drove another car from the garage to the restaurant where he worked. Chapter 262. In the intensive care unit of Columbia and Cornell Presbyterian Hospital in New York, an old man with all kinds of infusion tubes and oxygen tubes was lying quietly on the bed. His eyes were sharp and full of vigor, not at all like a dying patient who had just regained consciousness. The one who was checking his body at the bedside was not a doctor, nurse, or even his children. Instead, it was an old man with white hair and trembling movements who looked like he was about to enter the coffin. The latter was holding a crystal that emitted a colorful light and gently placed it on the old man's forehead. Then, he whispered in a language that no one else could understand. After about 2 or 3 minutes, he suddenly stopped what he was doing and said in a voice that was worse than crying, "Mr. Councilman, your body has been corroded by alchemy too much. I can't do anything about it anymore. Your life will come to an end in at most 12 hours. Please prepare for your funeral as soon as possible. Although you have made a lot of friends over the years, you also have a lot of enemies. It's hard to guarantee that they won't take revenge on your descendants." Obviously, the person lying on the bed was none other than one of the most powerful people in New York. At the same time, he was also the real ruler of Brooklyn, Councilman Miles. He had a carefree smile on his face, as if he did not care about death at all. He comforted in a low voice, "Don't worry, Francis. I know my body's condition very well, and I know very well what has happened recently. Do you know? I have made many important decisions in my life, but none of them are more important than the one I made today. Are you referring to the young magus who suddenly appeared? The old man called Francis asked carefully. Yes, a young man who is mysterious and dangerous, and has knowledge and power that I have never seen before. I feel endless potential from him, especially the alchemy used in these few bottles of magic potions. It's completely different from the alchemy that I have learned. Do you know what this means? As he spoke, Miles casually picked up a few bottles of low-level magic potions that were placed on the bedside table. Francis frowned and thought for a few seconds. Soon, he shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I know nothing about alchemy. I can't understand what you mean." Miles took a deep breath and sighed softly. Yes, if even you, who have followed me for 50 years, can't understand, then the others won't understand how important he is. Alchemy, in essence, is a magical technique that uses energy to change matter. As someone who uses this technique, it is inevitable that they will be affected by the process of converting matter and energy again and again. My broken body is the best proof of this. However, the alchemy technique he used perfectly solved this problem. The potion did not contain any impurities and was as pure as a work of art. I have enough reasons to believe that one day he will be able to break the boundary between life and death and achieve the two ultimate goals of alchemy: resurrection of the dead and immortality. I understand. You want to get a chance to come back to life from him. Francis was enlightened. That's right. Although this was probably just an extravagant hope that could never be realized, it was much better than dying forever, wasn't it? Moreover, none of my descendants have the talent for alchemy. Instead of leaving my efforts to bring disaster to them, why not give it to this young magus in exchange for his protection? While saying this, Miles glanced at his 10-year-old granddaughter who was sitting on a chair outside the ward. Her face was full of pain and helplessness. No one knew better than him the cruel law of survival in the underground world. Once he, as a counselor, died, those who had been suppressed and punished by him would definitely come out from the dark corners and launch a cruel and merciless revenge. Perhaps his allies would take care of his family for the sake of their friendship in the past. However, as time passed, the friendship would eventually fade. It could be a few months or a few years. Those who were hiding in the dark would definitely find a suitable time to complete their revenge, and then disguise it as a murder or an accident in the world of ordinary people. Similar situations had happened many times when Miles was a counselor. In the end, without exception, nothing was done. No one would be willing to start a feud with another supernatural power user for a group of cold corpses. If he didn't want his family to be massacred after his death, the only way was to find a strong enough protector before he breathed his last. Francis undoubtedly knew what his master, who he had served for 50 years, was thinking. He softly comforted, "Sir, actually, you don't have to worry too much. At least before the war game ends, no one will dare to act rashly. Otherwise, they will become the enemy of all the lords in Brooklyn, unless they are an idiot or a lunatic. As for after the war game ends, the newly appointed counselors will try their best to restore the stability of the district. Otherwise, they won't be able to compete with the other veteran counselors." I understand what you said, but the problem is, how do you know that there are no lunatics among my enemies? Do you still remember Patty? I heard that she recently used illegal immigration to return to New York. Is it not enough for me to be vigilant when she comes back at this time? Patty, the banshee who killed 35 adult males in a week. Oh my God, that crazy woman is back? What does she want to do? Francis's voice was filled with nervousness and fear. I don't know. On the bright side, she wants to reclaim her territory. On the other hand, she came back to take revenge on me for stripping her of her title and position. No matter which one it is, Brooklyn won't be peaceful in the future. Plus, Catherine, the Witch of Desire, the situation is getting more and more complicated. It has long been out of my control. Okay, now go downstairs to welcome my guest. He should be here soon. Miles obviously didn't want to reveal any more secrets to his servant. He waved his hand with difficulty, indicating that Francis could leave. As you wish. Francis placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply. He turned around and opened the door to walk out of the ICU. He didn't even care about the men and women who came up to ask about Miles's condition. He took the elevator to the lobby on the first floor and patiently waited for the arrival of the guest. About 5 or 6 minutes later, an inconspicuous silver-gray car stopped in front of the hospital. Chapter 263. Staring at the old man who suddenly appeared in front of him, Zhang Cheng was stunned for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He smiled and bowed back. "Of course. This is the purpose of my visit. May I know how to address you?" "Francis. You can call me Francis. I've served the senator for 50 years, and I'm his most loyal servant. I have to say, I'm quite sad to see him leave this world in pain. I hope he can fulfill his last wish before he breathes his last," the old man said as he led the way. From the beginning to the end, he didn't even look at the Pullman. To be exact, he completely ignored his existence. However, Pullman didn't show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. Instead, he quietly followed behind. He knew very well that in the eyes of many higher-ups, he was still an insignificant cleaner. Unless he could prove his strength or ability one day, he would never be recognized. As a lawyer who had been in various lawsuits for a long time, he was already used to the fickleness of human nature. He knew when to be patient and when to be a little stronger. Zhang Cheng ignored the subtle atmosphere between the two and quickly took the elevator to the entrance of the ICU. Just as he was about to push the door open and walk in, Francis suddenly stopped in his tracks. He turned around and said to the lawyer with a serious expression, "I'm sorry, sir. The senator only wants to see Zhang. Could you please wait outside with me?" "No problem." The Pullman agreed without hesitation. "Thank you very much. Mr. Zhang, please come in." Francis opened the door and gestured for him to enter. Zhang Cheng took a deep breath and directly stepped into the room. He didn't remember the pungent smell of disinfectant unique to Chinese medicine hospitals. Instead, due to the large number of plants, it was filled with a faint grassy fragrance. There was even a blooming iron tree on the balcony. It was no wonder that some people would say that New York Columbia Hospital and Cornell Presbyterian Hospital were special hospitals specially prepared for the rich. Whether it was the environment or the service, they were far from comparable to ordinary hospitals. Coupled with the chilling medical expenses in the United States, it was probably impossible to pay the bills here without tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars. "Ah, you've finally come, young wizard." Miles, who was lying on the hospital bed, gently knocked on the bedside table, trying to attract the attention of the guests. "It's an honor to be summoned by you, honorable councilman." Zhang Cheng bowed slightly to show his respect. After the training of the Song of Ice and Fire, he could now deal with all kinds of situations and ensure that he would not be disrespectful due to differences in etiquette and culture. Miles carefully sized up the young man standing in front of him. After a full minute, he exclaimed in a rather surprised tone, "I've long heard that you've successfully banished a demon, but I didn't expect you to have actually reached this level. To what extent?" Zhang Cheng pretended that he didn't know anything and asked back, "How should I put it?" Miles touched his chin as if he was thinking about something. After about 3 to 5 seconds, he explained in a deep voice, "According to the standards set by the council a long time ago, all the residents of the underground world are divided into 24 levels according to their strength, which are respectively represented by the 24 Greek letters. Among them, the 4 levels from Alpha to Delta are considered low level and not enough to pose any substantial threat. Most of the ordinary residents belong to this category. There are many of them, but they can only engage in some marginal jobs to maintain their daily lives. But from Epsilon onwards, the danger will increase exponentially. Up to the 8th level, which is the Sitha level, will become a watershed. Those above the Sitha level are qualified to become lords, while those below the Sitha level can only become knights who swear allegiance to the Lord. Judging from the energy surrounding your body, you have just crossed the Sitha level. Even without alchemy, you are fully qualified to become a lord. I have to say, this is very surprising to me. Although there is no lack of talented young powerhouses in the underground world, most of them either come from ancient families with hundreds or even thousands of years of history, or carefully cultivated elites of some organizations. But you're different. You suddenly appeared alone in a secluded alley in New York Harbor. You do not understand the rules of the underground world. I am very curious. Where did you come from? And where did you obtain your knowledge and strength? Following one question after another, this old man whose eyes were shining with the light of wisdom forced Zhang Cheng into a corner. Perhaps he had lost most of his strength, but he was still a terrifying opponent. So, I am now qualified to become a lord, right? Zhang Cheng cleverly changed the topic. He was not an idiot. He knew that lying was definitely the most foolish thing to do, so he chose to avoid answering. Ha ha, cunning fellow. All right, since you do not want to reveal your origin, I will not force you. But as the beginning of a friendly negotiation, you should at least take out something to show your sincerity, right? Miles laughed as he spread his hands. In fact, he did not intend to find out the other party's origin from the beginning. He only wanted to use this method to increase the bargaining chips in his hands. Zhang Cheng secretly cursed the old fox. He opened his backpack and took out a few glass test tubes that were emitting a strange luster and handed them over. Here, I believe they should be enough to show my sincerity. Miles, who had dedicated his life to alchemy, hurriedly struggled to sit up and took the magic potion. He opened the cork and took a small sip. With every sip, his eyes became brighter. Finally, he praised without hesitation. Perfect. No impurities. No pollution. It is as pure as an alchemy's stone. How did you do it? Damn it. If it was not for the fact that I am about to die, I would definitely think of a way to ask the theory of this alchemy technique from you. Calm down, Mr. Councilman. I do not want to see you suddenly die because of emotional agitation. Now, can you tell me, why do you want to meet me at this time? Or what do you want to use the knowledge in your hands to exchange with me? Zhang Cheng went straight to the point. Don't worry, young man, don't worry. I will not die in a short time. We have enough time. First, you have to tell me, what is the relationship between you and the desire witch Catherine? Don't tell me you have slept with her? If the answer is yes, then the following conversation can be stopped. No one knows her and her power better than I do. When a man falls into the trap of desire she weaves, there is absolutely no way he can escape. Miles hinted meaningfully. What kind of person do you think I am? A wild beast controlled by low-level desires? No, I assure you, our relationship can only be considered as taking what we need and using each other. After saying that, Zhang Cheng walked to the window and admired a stone statue placed in the middle of many plants.